Okay, everyone, we are starting. Thank you so much for coming to our policy summit today. My name is Jill Escher. I'm president of NCSA, and I'm here with my co-host, Amy Lutz, the vice president of NCSA. And we are expecting to have a really kind of fun and informative 4 hours. The policy summit is really just meant to be sort of an introduction to some of the issues that we are facing in the severe autism community. It's 4 hours. I got a lot of emails from people saying, are you addressing X, Y, or Z? And the fact of the matter is that we're only going to address so much and probably a little bit scratching the surface. But I think it's going to be a very nice and very solid introduction into some of the more important issues that we are facing as a community. We also have some really wonderful guests. I'm so excited to have so many people from so many disability and autism organizations represented here today. So we are going to have 2 sessions. We're going to have 1 session, then at around 11, we are going to take a little break, and then we're going to have session number 2. The logistics in terms of questions, please use the Q&A and not chat to ask questions. And Amy and I are going to lob as many questions as we possibly can to our speakers. It's going to be a little bit informal. We'll sometimes wedge some in, while they're speaking. We'll sometimes do it afterwards. We'll do what we can to kind of keep time and keep pace. So without further ado, I think we're going to go right into it. First, I'm going to start by introducing NCSA. We're a relatively new organization, a little more than 2 years old. We were formed by a group of parents and practitioners who were growing increasingly concerned that there was a large and growing gap in the awareness and advocacy for those on the more severe end of the spectrum. So in essence, we're trying to be a voice for those who can't advocate for themselves. We view autism not as a mere difference or a diversity, but as a major public health emergency that requires a very serious, very sober and very urgent response. And we raise authentic awareness. We want to serve as a platform for individuals, families, practitioners to share their true stories, to share their own truths, because only if we know the reality of what is going on can we properly address it. And we focus on realistic and pragmatic solutions and not on wishful thinking. So what do we do? Here are a few things. Oops, sorry. We obviously try to raise authentic awareness. We have a webinar series. This year we have 10 webinars on tap, and you can sign up for them. They're all free. So you can just go to our homepage and find the link, or here's the link over here. We obviously have a website with a very active blog. Oh, I'm going to ask my panelists to please mute yourselves. Sorry, panelists. And we have a very active Facebook page. If you aren't already following us, please follow us. We're easy to find. Just type in our name. We have a monthly or so newsletter. We engage in education and advocacy, and we try to serve as like a seat at the table for policy discussions to make sure that our portion of the disability world is represented. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Jill. We thought it would be very appropriate to start our day of talking about severe autism by defining what we mean when we talk about severe autism. So of course, this is not a technical term. There's no category in the DSM that identifies severe autism, but what we mean is, this is from our website, is people who suffer from this combination of intellectual disability, often behavioral challenges, limited use of language, and profound dependence that kind of translates into continuous or near continuous lifelong services. So these are individuals who are profoundly impaired by their autism. There's just no other way to describe it. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, sorry.
So, and I think it's really important to point out that the challenges facing severe autism families, we could spend the entire webinar talking about this, of course. This is just some of them, but notably, these are very different from those challenges that are faced by those on the higher end of the spectrum. And that's why we felt that we had to kind of form the NCSA to address these specific challenges. And those include the comorbidities like affective disorders, OCDs, insomnia, and seizures. That's on our minds a lot lately. The financial stress of always having to have somebody that's supervising the person with severe autism. So often both parents can't work. The social isolation and the inability to leave the house. These pictures they're not from anyone in our families on the board, but these are just pictures that have been submitted to us by families that we represent. In the bottom, you can see the damage to the walls that were, the result of kicks or punches during a rage. I know I myself in my house have holes that look a lot like that. And of course, the physical injury that our children, our adult children or young children have done to themselves through self-injurious behavior, through accidents, and also through aggressive rages against family members and teachers and peers. And overall, there's just this real panic about the future. And I hope we'll be able to talk about that today, is how can we craft policy that will better prepare or better support our families moving forward. There's this joke in the severe autism world where you just can't die the parents, because there's no one who's going to take care of our kids. The services are not there, the support's not there. And hopefully if we can do nothing else, maybe we can, over the next few years, change that landscape so the parents don't feel that they have to live forever.
So we're going to now move on, thank you, Amy, to our next session, which we're calling Hot Topics in Severe Autism. There are probably 100 hot topics in severe autism, so we're just highlighting a few, and we have different members of our board speaking to them. We're going to start off with Maysoon, and I do have to pull up her special presentation, so I have to do a little stop share and reshare, so bear with me. I will find it.
Do you want me to do it and share screen?
Oh, I'll do it. I can do it. I have it. Okay. One sec, sorry. As I said, I'm not the most technically adept. Okay, so here we go. I'll do my share screen and you'll be on. All right, Maysoon, over to you.
Thank you. I just want to discuss briefly the importance of sharing the realities of what life is like with severe autism and why it's absolutely crucial to create your social, your online imprints now if you haven't already. So next slide. Am I able to touch it or no? Okay, perfect. So we are absolutely inundated with messages, whether it's notifications, news outlets, social media, photos, videos. I mean, everything competes for our attention, our attention and our curiosity. So I imagine it's very extremely difficult for someone who doesn't have the stress of having, an individual in your house that's your autism to cut through that noise. But whether we like it or not, perception is 9/10 of reality. And honestly, probably the answer to the most common complaint I hear from the severe autism community as to why their voices are not being heard or acknowledged. We do not have a strong online presence and are competing with viral hashtags such as, hashtag actually autistic and autism is a blessing and the likes from individuals who are leading the conversation on autism because they can actually have one. So the next slide. Sorry, you went back. The next slide, slide 3, sorry. So yes, they will dominate and lead the narrative they want and create the perception they want the world to have on autism. I've experienced that myself when my late sister, Fidema Lutz, passed away. And, the conversation was being shifted to, well, she said these comments and this, and I just thought, this is pretty much what's to be expected because they are the majority and they are naturally blessed in having that ability to represent their own voice and therefore dominate the conversation in the media and online. So next slide. So, how we can do it basically by raising our voices, and which equals power of numbers, power in numbers. And, we can amplify this by starting today with having a daily commitment of a post a day. Next slide. So a way to do it, I remember my late sister, it was always an effort from her team. She involved family, friends, caregivers, teachers to help create, document, and create, find the content daily and just send it to her. And whether she would upload it or not, that was up to her. But she had a huge amount of content available. And then, number two, sharing openly and honestly. It really empowers the rest of the community to follow in your path, and you kind of inspire them to want to continue to or not be afraid, essentially, of sharing too much or not. And then really three, it's a matter of finding the platform you like, whether it's a long form, you're blogging on Medium, vlogs on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook. Just play with it, experiment, and see what's easier for you to manage in your daily life. And then, number four, really don't fear the feedback and ignore the haters, and really just only engage in constructive conversations that don't rob you of your time or sanity. Because you have to remind yourself you're playing a long game and harnessing a habit that will pay off in the long run. Next slide. Oh, I can move it. I didn't know that. This is a video. Does it have sound, Jill? Hello?
Okay.
Okay, I can play it. Let me do it.
No, I don't think you can. Hold on.
Oh, I can't, no. So this is a sample of a video that I made. Were you able to hear that?
I think so.
Okay, I wasn't. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
This is just a kind of example of showing, how Moo was, he's nonverbal, and, he's learning his, a few words at a time. And I thought it was like super cute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Maysoon. I don't know why the audio is not coming through. You can't hear it?
No, but if everybody else can, that's fine. Oh, no, they can't either.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
Why don't you turn the volume on your end, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know.
Hi.
Okay.
Everyone. Can you say bye? Bye, everyone.
So next one. This is Moo when he was baking with my daughter. That was it ended badly.
This is the baking soda. I saw her. What do you think, babe? What's the situation? What is this? I've never seen this in my life.
You can share the next one now. I'm just kind of sharing ideas on little things. This is super cute. That's where she jumps up. She's like, I'm going to beat her other kids. But the next one is just a still image, where she put a little caption, my 1 to 88. So, it was simple, it's powerful, just kind of some ideas. And the next one. But so honestly, this quote is everything, because we won't remember what that person said, when they said it, but we will remember how we felt by watching something, by seeing something, by reading something. And I think that's why it's super important to be very authentic and brutally honest in when you're sharing. Share the truth. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't edit it. This community does not have that luxury. I think it needs to show extreme realities, whether it's good or bad. You know, you can give trigger warnings, which is, you know, helpful for people, but just, you know, if I can make sure you work on eliciting that emotion from your audience. You know, and then last slide. I don't believe, especially in this community, the advocate can be separated from the cause. So speaking up and sharing is absolutely crucial. And I don't think it's no longer an option to not want to engage online. I know it's a chore. I know it's like, how are you going to find the time? But make it a daily, almost religious practice, because we really need a lot more voices online on this community, because eventually we can potentially leverage the cause and, you know, request, you know, media outlets like Google, Facebook, Amazon to elevate the conversation, especially with Autism Awareness Month coming up. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maysoon. Appreciate that. And yeah, we are definitely in favor of people sharing their own stories to the extent that they feel comfortable doing so for exactly the reasons that you say. All right, now we are going to go on. Our next speaker is Denise Lombardi, who is our board treasurer, and I will get the slides up just now. There you go, Denise.
Thank you, Jill. So my name is Denise Lombardi, and I currently serve as the treasurer of NCSA. I am the parent of a 17-year-old young man who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 19 months. And I'm going to speak briefly today about autism and premature mortality. If we can move to the next slide. The presentation will briefly cover the types of mortality that those with ASD are prone to and discuss why more research is needed in this area. Generally speaking, there is an excess risk of death associated with autism. In the study that was referenced in this slide, the rate of death among the general population was 0.91% versus 2.6% among the autism population. So a question that we have to consider is, why is intellectual disability an important factor with regard to those on the spectrum? And the answer to that has to do with the high rate of comorbidity of ID, which varies between 30% and 50% among those with autism, and the fact that premature mortality is markedly increased in this subgroup, as the odds ratios in this slide highlights. So if we can move on to the next slide. I've listed some of the most common causes of death for this subgroup: diseases of the nervous system, congenital malformations, mental and behavioral disorders, respiratory, digestive, and endocrine diseases. I feel it's really important to note that diseases of the nervous system, such as epilepsy, have an odds ratio with elevated mortality of approximately 40. You know, from the limited evidence that's available, it is possible that people in this subgroup on average are losing decades off their lives. Please also know that the study I'm referencing here stated that they were unable to differentiate whether increased mortality in ASD is because of shortcomings in care provision, increased general biological vulnerability, or both of those factors. Next slide, please. So here we say that according to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, the percentage of those with ASD and epilepsy is approximately 20 to 30%. This is in contrast to a rate of 1 to 2% in the general population. And we know for the general population, studies show that epilepsy and seizure-related deaths are underreported. It's a leading cause of death for autistic adults with ID. Next slide. Other causes of death, such as injury, asphyxiation, drowning, and suffocation, are equally concerning. In a 2017 study published in the American Journal of Public Health, the researchers found that deaths caused by unintentional injuries is 3 times as likely in the autism population than in the general population. They also noted, and this is a recurring issue among studies, that their results were limited by inconsistent death certificate data, and concluded that autism as a contributing cause of death is likely underreported. Last slide. So why are people with ASD more at risk of dying prematurely? The answer is we really don't know. It's an understudied area of autism. So what do we need? Well, it's been demonstrated that this subgroup, and when I say subgroup, I'm referring to people with autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability, is consistently overlooked in research studies. I personally believe that we need separate diagnostic categorization for those with profound forms of autism in order to target research towards their conditions that result in the highest rates of premature mortality. And I believe that we need government policies that facilitate the collection of useful data, accurate data, comprehensive data, data that considers autism as a potentially contributing factor of mortality. I believe that policies, have to be developed that focus on identification of those most at risk, research focused on them, and on the identification and elimination of barriers to healthcare. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Denise. Appreciate that. Very important issue. And speaking of seizures and epilepsy, we're moving on to our next speaker, Allison Singer. Allison, you can unmute yourself.
I have done that.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And Jill, you can advance to the next slide, please. So this is my daughter, Jody, and she has autism. And when I say that, it pretty much means nothing, because looking at her, you just see a beautiful, happy young woman. You have no idea whether she is higher functioning, lower functioning, has intellectual disability, attends college, works at Microsoft, or sits in my basement playing video games all day. Next slide, please. Jody is profoundly affected by her autism, and she works doing a job that she loves, raising animals on a farm. She lives in an intentional community in the Catskills in New York called the Center for Discovery, and I saw some other center parents on the chat, so welcome. The Center for Discovery is an intentional community where adults with autism, adults with other types of disabilities live and work together. She has minimal language and she struggles with self-injurious behaviors. She has seizures that have caused her physical harm. In fact, tomorrow she will be having surgery to repair her jaw. This week she fell having a seizure, she broke 3 teeth and she fractured her jaw. And such is autism. Next slide, please.
Panelists, I'm going to ask you to mute yourselves. We are having a little bit of interference. Thank you. All right, I'll go back.
So on a typical day, Jody shows little interest in other people, but she does enjoy the company of the other autistic women that she works with, who share her interest in farming and love doing giant floor puzzles with her. And they love to relax together after a hard day of work on the farm. These are real people with autism. Next slide. These fictional characters are portrayed as people with autism. One is a scientist, another is a surgeon. Tomorrow, my daughter will be having surgery. She will not be performing surgery. Others of these shows focus on autistic adults who are looking for romantic partners. Not one of these shows represents the reality of my daughter's autism. In fact, the word autism is now so broadly applied that it's practically meaningless. In the previous version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, autistic disorder was defined as a specific cluster of characteristics, including abnormal social interaction and communication, and a restricted repertoire of activities and interests. The manual included separate diagnoses for Asperger's syndrome and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which were typically given to people on the milder end of the spectrum. With the current version of the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, all of those diagnoses have disappeared. Since 2013, when this version of the DSM debuted, individuals with a wide range of autism features have all received the same diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. This means that someone diagnosed with autism can have genius level IQ or have intellectual disability. It can include someone who has no language, minimal language, or perfectly intact language. It can apply to an individual who has self-injurious, aggressive behavior, or someone who has trouble navigating the social scene in the school cafeteria. It can describe a person who graduated from Harvard Law School, or an individual who exited high school with a certificate of attendance and participation, like my daughter. Dr. Catherine Lord, if you could, not ready for that one yet. Dr. Catherine Lord, a professor at UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, and a member of the Lancet Commission on the Future of Care and Research in Autism, debuted the term profound autism during the Autism Science Foundation's annual Day of Learning in September of 2020. Dr. Lord noted that autism is an incredibly heterogeneous condition, and there is a vast difference between a person with high functioning, high IQ autism, who can still function somewhat typically in society, versus a person with who is severe enough to require round-the-clock care. According to Dr. Lord, the Lancet Commission on Autism, which is due to publish a special autism issue later this year, concluded that useful categories might bring attention to the different needs of different people. Next slide, please. The Lancet Commission proposes that the term profound autism be adopted to apply to children and adults with autism who have or are very likely to have the following functional needs: 24-hour access to an adult who can care for them if concerns arise, individuals who cannot be completely left alone in a residence and cannot take care of basic everyday adaptive needs. In most cases, these needs will be associated with significant intellectual disability, IQ below 50, as well as limited language and limited ability to understand and communicate to a stranger using comprehensible sentences. This designation is not defined by, but may be associated with other difficulties, including self-injury, oppositional behavior, and sometimes physical health issues such as epilepsy. This would never be a compulsory category. Someone who has some of these characteristics or who is functioning well in a supportive environmental setting can choose not to use this term. But we want to make it available for autistic people, for families, and clinicians to apply in advocacy and descriptions. Next slide, please. The Lancet is also proposing a clinical definition for diagnosis, which is defined as verbal, nonverbal, or full-scale IQ at or below 50, and or minimally verbal status as defined by the ADOS. Using this definition and accounting for the and or in the definition and the limits or how that limits and or expands the definition, we calculate that between 17 and 48% of people with autism meet these criteria. If we want to be able to plan for the supports and services our family members need, it is imperative to have language and categories that reflect the vast differences between people with autism. The term profound autism is certainly not meant to further stigmatize people who fall into this category, but rather to provide necessary differentiation and additional support for people and families who need it most. Like the rest of the NCSA board, I originally preferred the term severe autism, and thus the organization's name is National Council for Severe Autism. But the clinical community said there are issues surrounding the term severe from a clinical standpoint, and they are embracing the term profound, as they agree that there is a need for differentiation. Frankly, I don't care if you say my daughter has bibbledy-bobbledy-boo autism, as long as there is some sort of term that describes her cluster of symptoms and that leads to a basket of services that meet her needs. If the clinical community will embrace the term profound, then I'm fine with that term too. Next slide, please. And please, I hope you will all join me in embracing the new term profound autism, Our family members need this, and our family members deserve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. We're a little bit behind, so we're going to move on. If there are questions, we will address them at the end. Thank you, Allison. Let's move on to Lisa Parles, who will be talking about education. Lisa.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm the mother of Andrew, who's a 30-year-old man with autism, who, in addition to having severe autism, has complex medical needs and challenging behaviors. I'm also an attorney that represents individuals with disabilities and their families located in New Jersey, which, as many of you know, was one of the early epicenters of the COVID outbreak. So though the practice is always challenging, interesting, this year, I would say, reached a level that we could never have imagined, which I know all of us have probably said about the last year. So I'm going to do three things today. I'm going to just cover some definitions, some key terms. I imagine most of you are already familiar with that. I'm also want to talk a little bit about NCSA's position on special education placements. And then last, touch on a couple COVID-related issues, which is some of the ones that are, I think, currently we're seeing across the board. Next slide, please. So as I said, when we're trying to look at what's the source of an individual's right to education, we're going to look in a couple different places. Most of you are probably familiar with particularly IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act of 2004, which that's the most what's the word I want to say? The amendment that has happened recently. This law has been around in a number of different formats for quite some time. Another source, of course, is the 504 Rehabilitation Act. I think the important point is that when you're trying to ascertain what someone's right is to education, you have to look at first, of course, the federal law, but then also the state law, because each state, by getting federal funds, they codify the law. So it will be in the state law as well. Now, states can do more than the federal law. So for instance, I can give you one example. In New Jersey, there was a change to the law after a Supreme Court decision that changed the burden of proof in hearings, and it was to the person who filed it. And when New Jersey reacted to that, what they did was we passed a law that said that the burden of proof was actually always on the school districts, not on whoever filed. And so in addition to the federal law and the state statutory law, there's also, of course, case law, which is going to be both federal and state law. Another point, though, is that particularly since COVID, an important source of information is going to be guidance as well, because a lot what has happened over this last year in addressing these challenges, these topics, is that it has not actually been changes in the law, but just guidance that's been either issued at the federal and in some cases the state level. Next slide, please. So I think probably almost everyone on this webinar probably could recite this, or at least parts of it, because these are the key phrases you hear all the time, often in IEP meetings, that a child with a disability is entitled to receive FAPE, which is the free appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Deciding what that A in FAPE appropriate is where most of the dispute occurs. And it is often what's most difficult for families, because if a district doesn't agree with you, you sometimes have to bring considerable resources to the table, such as an expert, your own data and information, consultants, to order to show that what the district has either proposed or has been given is not appropriate. So that's the million-dollar question, and what most cases are the disputes surround. The other important topic is in the least restrictive environment. I think one of the common errors and one of the common things that are told to families when families ask for a change of placement So one scenario that we frequently see is that a student could be in a public school and not progressing, and the parent is requesting a change of placement to perhaps a out-of-district approved private school, and perhaps even one particularly geared towards individuals with autism. You'll often hear from the district, oh, we can't do that because we have to deliver it in the least restrictive environment. It's the phrase goes together. It's the least restrictive environment, but that's also appropriate. And there is a great variety, just as there's a great variety within the autism spectrum, there's a great variety of services available, and you really have to individualize what's appropriate. So that common misperception that we can't jump from A to C is just, it's really not true. And in fact, in COVID, this has come up pretty frequently because we have had children that were in certain settings that would be considered less restrictive, but because of regression and increase in challenging behaviors now require settings with more intensive services. And it's not a hierarchy that you have to jump through. So it's not like you have to go from the inclusion class to the public school autism to then next the public school autism school to the private school to the residential. Whatever's appropriate at the time has to be looked at. So you could jump from an inclusive setting in a public school all directly down and directly into a residential setting. Okay, next slide, please. So obviously this is a lot of words. There's actually 3 slides on it, and it's on our website. I think that the most important point.
Yeah, Lisa, in the name of timing, just because we're almost out of time, if you can start wrapping up.
No problem. Just
okay.
To the key points on the next 3 slides, which we can fly through, is that the core and key of to our position was that it should be individualized and there should be an array of services. So choice is very important. Though we respect some individuals can be successfully included, some students may have to go into a specialized setting. So we can go through the next 3 slides. And on just a quick wrap up, I will keep going, Jill, till we get to COVID. Some of the COVID issues that have come up, as I said, there's guidance, so you can look at the federal guidance, which it was not particularly helpful, but at least it did not remove the right to the free appropriate education. We had some concerns they were going to suspend some of those rights, but they did leave some leeway that it's to the greatest extent possible. Next slide, please. And also to the topic now that is now not only looking at federal guidance, but look to your state is once the school buildings reopen, there is a mandate that you're looking at if the child is regressed and if compensatory services are needed. Next slide and last one. Some of the key COVID issues are that, as I said, there's no waiver of IDEA. You still have the right to that. The compensatory education is something that must be looked at, and someone may actually do that, which could be extra tutoring, and in some cases even extra years of schooling. Graduation is a big issue. Probably the most important thing on this is that advocacy is playing a very big role. So for instance, in New Jersey right now, we have several pieces of legislation pending that would actually hold off graduation for individuals because of really this loss of a year, particularly in the vocational area. So lots of topics, and happy to answer questions as we move on today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. There are a few questions in the Q&A box. You might look at that. Appreciate that. Okay, we are moving on to me now. I am going to talk very briefly on another hot topic. This hot topic is about guardianship. I think a lot of people know there has been quite a concerted attack on guardianship, or what they call here in California, conservatorship. Some people have likened it to slavery, various analogies, which are really inapt. What my experience has been in the autism community, that parents or other family members seek guardianship or conservatorship, not because they want to control their child, but because they want to protect their child, right? I've never seen anybody do it for any other reason than that. Guardianship provides severely autistic adults with legally enforceable and judicially monitored protections they need to ensure their interests are being met. So this is my son at his conservatorship hearing with my husband. Why did we put him under conservatorship? Because if something goes wrong, he's nonverbal. He has no way of ever indicating, right, what he wants with regard to medical care or with regard to his housing situation or regard to any contract. So as much as we adore our Johnny, he just has no capacity to do that at all. Now, these guardianships can be narrowly crafted based on the specific incapacities of the disabled individual. You know, for Johnny, we got all of them, but in other cases, that's not true. There'd be only certain powers given to the conservator or guardian. The guardians have an enforceable duty to act in the individual's best interests. They don't do it in their own interest. They have to act in the conservatee's best interests, including considering their preferences before rendering any decisions over medical, psychiatric, behavioral, financial, or other aspects of care. Now, that said, guardianship is often inappropriate for many adults with autism. There are alternatives to guardianship, for example, power of attorney, but to delegate that power of attorney, let's say to a family member, the individual with autism has to have the cognitive capacity, the legal capacity to make that delegation. That's a key difference between a conservatorship, guardianship, and a power of attorney. My son, for example, would not be able to make that delegation knowingly. Family members are generally the best surrogate decision makers for those who can't make complex decisions for themselves. I'm not an expert in this field, but Amy Lutz, who is immersed in bioethics, assures me that the literature is very clear that we are the best surrogate decision makers. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule, right? But generally speaking. Now, there's a movement afoot to replace guardianship with something called supported decision making. Supported decision making is based on the assumption that all people with IDD can make their own decisions with informal support from a network of family, friends, advisors. And I'm sure in some cases that is true. But in cases like my son and most of us with kids with severe autism, it's not true. In SDM, these people are not court appointed. They're not subject to legal supervision or responsibility. And really troubling to me is that the right to fail and the dignity of risk are seen as important freedoms in the SDM framework, regardless of the dangers to the individual. So, my son, if you said, "Hey, Johnny, go do what you want," he would run outside and get hit by a car. Well, that's a right to fail that I'm not willing, right, to subject him to. And one thing I want to make a really broad comment here, because it's not just about guardianship. But what we're seeing in the disability rights movement, and I actually support a lot of the disability rights movement, but they have a tendency towards scorched earth tactics, where they try to get rid of an entire framework or entire set of programs or entire policy, right? Rather than just making meaningful reforms. And we've seen this kind of scorched earth tactic with respect to guardianship, with respect to employment, right? The attack on sub-minimum wages, even for those with the most severe disabilities, with respect to ICFs, and with respect to home and community-based services under Medicaid. Okay, so with that, let's try to catch up on time, and we're going to move to our next hot topic with Gloria. Gloria Cetriale, you are on.
Okay, had to get my video on there. So good morning, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us today to start this conversation. And there's been so many great things said, and I was trying to take some notes. How many times did I hear the word reality? So great agreement there that a lot of what we're seeing and what we're hearing doesn't reflect the reality of our, the subset of our kids. Mine is Nikki. He's 30 years old, number 2 child of 5, and he is profoundly affected by his autism and severe behaviors and limits in communication, and most importantly, having difficulty making sense of the world and finding his place in it. And services for adults with autism and employment specifically haven't really helped him out a lot in that. And that being said, Nikki has actually been kind of lucky, but I think that's in no small measure to the exhausting effort that parents have to put into structuring these things, supervising these things, trying to affect these things, all of these services. And we saw these words fly in to this slide, and it's all over the place, and it's confusing, and that's on purpose because adult services are all over the place. They are confusing, they are inconsistent, and there are many attacks that overshadow the current infrastructure to force and hijack these things into a globally applicable program, which does not work. Next slide, please. So we heard a lot about that reality word and the past, present, and future reality of services for adults with autism is just dearth. There isn't enough of it. There is a very low availability for services, funding to support those services. I know we're going to hear more about housing, and I'm trying to catch up with time, but it doesn't matter. We can't go into any of these things in depth. That would be a full day seminar on each one of these topic areas. But to get a little bit more specific, the dearth of support staff. There are 4.6 million DSPs, direct support professionals is the lingo in the adult world. The average pay rate in Pennsylvania anyway is $14 an hour. The average national turnover rate is 52% per year with a 47% vacancy rate. In Pennsylvania, at least, there is required training, and that required training is largely inapplicable to the daily day in a life of what they need to know to keep people productively engaged, safe, etc. Employment supports and opportunities. Many of you know about the 14C movement to take away the ability for individuals who work at a sub-minimum wage. And that's been a hot butt topic. OVR systematically rejects all individuals that have any severe behavior or other severe challenges. So our subset of the population of individuals suffering from prevalent autism, it's just not available to you. Yet it is the main structure, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, when we're talking about employment. And then of course, COVID hit, and that kind of killed a lot of those opportunities because people are just scared. This is all going to get worse, the future reality. By 2023, 360,000 additional individuals are going to enter into an adult service model that is very, very limited in its availability to help. So it's a rising crisis. There's also kind of comparatively a dearth of information. If you do a Google search, a general Google search, if you do a Google Scholar search and you're looking at children, you get twice as many hits as you do when you're talking about adults. Next slide, please. This just gives you a little bit of the statistics. This is from the Drexel University National Longitudinal Study that was done on outcomes for adults. I encourage you to Google that and read it thoroughly. Lots of great information. I'm a glass half empty kind of guy. I guess, you know, I've just been beaten up too long. So I'm always looking at the downside, not the upside. But it's interesting to me that for employment and other day activities, which to me is productive engagement, something to do that you like, that makes you feel good. 14% of individuals are employed. Even though that's a low number, it's very positively stated, and I'm not knocking the 14%, that's great. But to me, the inverse is 86% have no employment opportunities at all. What is particularly scary to me about this recent study, the study's great, 2017, but in 2008, the Miami Card Center did a similar study, and the numbers really pretty much have not changed since 2008 in any of the categories. It's really pretty much the same. The scariest statistic being that 78% in 2008 didn't have a job now it's 86. And 78% of individuals in 2008 families didn't even know what to do about that. They didn't have enough information. If you're lucky to live on the right side of the slide in any of the green states, in 2019, let me look for my site, Dr. Robert Lawrence put together the top 10 states that are supposedly having the best supports for individuals with autism. I was shocked to see PA on there because I guess I have my own issues with PA, but comparatively, apparently, we're doing pretty well here. Next slide, please. The most promising new thing out there is, it's not really a bill yet, but almost, the Home and Community-Based Services Access Act of 2021. And I know we're going to talk about this a lot in the roundtable. So these are some of the bullet points that you will see if you look for information on this. It intends to eliminate waiting lists. It intends to make consistent across states availability for services, which is a big problem right now. And it intends to increase funding. Next slide, please. Oh, I thought I had more bullet points. Well, so you'll see the bullet points in the roundtable. Yeah, thanks, Jill, for going back to that. The devil's in the details here, though, right? And we're going to talk more about that. And we have a lot of experts with us today who can talk more intelligently about this than I can. But suffice it to say that this sounds great in theory. And if we can make it happen, if there's going to be an actual funded mandate, as we know there are so many under or unfunded mandates, wow, wouldn't that be great? If we could eliminate the waiting list, wow, couldn't that be great? And the glass half full people, good for you for believing that it can happen. I was kind of thinking, it's never going to happen. But you know what? If it does, we need to get our comments in by April 26th. There's a link on the next slide about how to do that, because it is really important to dive into those details to ensure that there remains a continuum of care, of availability of services for the variety of needs that are out there. I'm afraid that this mandatory piece within this potential legislation would close off things like intermediate care facilities that are so vital to our particular subset of the population. So please don't ignore this. Please get on this immediately. That is my Nikki. He is employed, yes, indeed. And wouldn't it be nice if we all had something to keep us productively engaged? And I can tell you, I'm a university professor at 2 different institutions, teaching clinicians and graduate students in adults, transition and employment and services for adults. And across the country, it's a pretty bleak outlook for the future.
Thank you, Gloria. I wish we had more time. I'm actually full of questions myself. And unfortunately, we do have to go on to our next speaker, who is Amy. Thank you so much, Gloria. Amy, go ahead.
Hi. So my son, Jonah, is 22. He's the oldest of 5 kids. And he still lives at home with us. And I don't see that changing anytime in the immediate future. Why? Because there's nothing out there where I feel comfortable kind of as a great place for him to live. I'm in Pennsylvania, so I've been a little distracted following the chat from how awful things are in Pennsylvania, as Gloria's in Pennsylvania too, and I completely agree. But what's the national scene? So more than 77,000 adults are waiting for housing that's needed in the next year. And this is a statistic from a few years ago, so almost certainly more now. This next one is a recent statistic that almost 900,000 autistic adults are living with caregivers age 60 or older. So you can imagine that those individuals are going to need residential placements, in the not too distant future. And in order to meet the immediate demand, we'd have to have an increase in residential services of 22%. And that is not being built right now. Next. So there's 2 questions that I think of when I think of housing. A lot of my advocacy is around housing. And so the 2 questions are, one is how much money is allotted to this problem? And obviously, the more money, the better. We obviously need more money. But the second question is what you're allowed to do with that money once you have it. So my son has a waiver from the state of Pennsylvania, and that would cover residential housing. But there's nothing in my state that I think is a good solution for him. And this is because of this ideological preference for only very small, inclusive housing. So the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network has gone from rejecting all institutions, which they've always done, and they define institution, very, very broadly to kind of any larger setting. But now in recent publications, ASON has called group homes smaller institutions. So as you can imagine, that basically leaves just individual homes and apartments in the community. Next slide. And that forecloses so many amazing projects that are going up all over the country, not in Pennsylvania. And these are just some of the ones some of these I've been to and some of the ones I've followed. And as you can see, these are beautiful, very diverse settings where autistic individuals with different preferences might be happy. So the one in the top left is First Place in Arizona, which is an apartment building and has a transition program. It's right in the middle of Phoenix. For people with moderate to mild autism. The one to the right is a farmstead. It's Safe Haven Farm in Ohio, and they do have severely impacted individuals living there. The one in the bottom right is the Ark Village in Jacksonville, Florida, which is just like an intentional community of separate homes mostly for individuals with developmental disabilities who don't require as much supervision. And the one on the left is Sweetwater Spectrum in California, which just rents to 16 autistic individuals, and the services are provided separately. So there's all types of models of service provision and housing that can be built by creative parents and providers and developers when the state's regulations permit it. Next. It's important to know as you dive into this world that larger settings are not prohibited. This is something that we hear from inclusion advocates, including the people in Pennsylvania when we go to speak to our Office of Developmental Programs. They'll say, well, we're just following the rules of CMS. We're going to have Melissa Harris from CMS here later, so hopefully we can get her to clarify. But what we can say is that in 2019, CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, issued new guidance, which retracted old guidance that had identified farmsteads and campuses and other types of larger settings as being inherently isolating and segregating. They removed all that language and stressed the importance of person-centered planning and affirmed a commitment to outcomes rather than physical characteristics of settings. So CMS doesn't say no to larger settings. And Olmstead is always cited as the Supreme Court case of Olmstead is always cited as an inclusion mandate, which I can only assume is by people who actually haven't read it, because it's very clear that Olmstead is a choice mandate. It was filed on behalf of women who wanted to leave their institution. They seem from from reading the case to be extraordinarily high functioning, and they thrived out in the community. But in no way was Olmstead meant to say that everybody has to be in the community. And I love this quote from Justice Kennedy. It would be unreasonable. It would be a tragic event if the Americans with Disabilities Act were interpreted so that states had some incentive for fear of litigation to drive those in need of medical care and treatment out of appropriate care and into settings with too little assistance and supervision. So the justices were envisioning exactly what's happening now, that Olmstead was twisted to force people into the community who aren't appropriately or preferentially served there. Next. So this is from our policy statement on housing. Housing policies on all levels, federal, state, and local, should aim to remove barriers and unleash new options and capacity. To this end, we call for a system that incentivizes and supports a full continuum of residential options. That is, in a nutshell, what we stand for. Full choice, a continuum of services from the most inclusive apartments in the middle of the city to farmsteads and larger campuses and intentional intentional communities. And if you are exploring these options for your own family members, I highly recommend you consult with these references I put at the bottom here. Together for Choice, the Coalition for Community Choice, and the Autism Housing Network are all organizations that are really focused on this question. And I'm indebted to them always, especially Desiree, Kamika, and Ashley Kim for providing me with statistics and answering my questions. And I encourage everybody to go check out those websites. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. You know, I'm going to ask all of the presenters if you could kindly attend to the Q&A box and type in answers as may be necessary. Unfortunately, we can't do live Q&A because we're out of time, and we want to get to our first keynote speaker. But before that, just a quickie. Another hot button issue is, of course, emergency preparedness, as Maysoon referenced earlier. You know, we lost, of course, our founding vice president, Feda Al-Malidi, and her beloved and wonderful son, Mu. They were a big part of my life and a big part of many people's lives. They died very senselessly in a house fire. And so a lot of us came together, and we are launching in September this year something called the September 26th Project, which commemorates the day that they passed. And it will serve as an annual reminder to autism families around the country, hopefully maybe even around the world, to take some sensible and basic steps to prepare for emergencies. Before I sign off and go to our keynote, Maysoon, would you like to add something?
That I'm looking forward to, you know, operating with more than one nonprofit, and you know, not just the severe autism community, but communities that where their, you know, adults or children suffer intellectual disabilities. I think this is absolutely the smallest detail that, you know, consume the life of two beautiful people and many others. And it was senseless, and but it was also something that, you know, you would never imagine. Well, that's the inability for somebody not to understand their life is in danger, and I think that's what we're dealing with here. And it puts the lives of their families and caregivers at a huge risk. So I look forward to, hopefully, you know, like Jill says, hopefully this will impact not just on a state level, national level, but hopefully on a global level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So everybody look for that in September, and please help us spread the word. So with that, I am going to turn this over to our keynote speaker, our first keynote speaker. We have two, Melissa Harris. Hello, Melissa. And you can go ahead and share your screen. You've unmuted, thank you. Amy, do you want to go ahead and introduce Melissa?
Sorry, yes, I was busy responding as directed to
Sorry.
questions that were directed at me in the Q&A. I am very happy to welcome Melissa Harris, who is the Deputy Director for the Disabled and Elderly Health Programs Group for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we are so grateful, Melissa, that you took some time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us today.
Thank you very much to Jill and to Amy and to everyone. It's really my pleasure to be with you today. I'm just double checking to make sure I don't have myself double muted. No, I think I'm okay.
You're good.
We are now a little over a year into full-time telework, and yet the number of times I still start talking on mute is shocking to me. But but we seem to be good here. So it's really, like I said, my pleasure to be here. I have spoken with some of you in other contexts before, and so it's good to see you again. And to those that I'm meeting for the first time, I am glad to know you. I am in a component of CMS that might be a little mysterious in terms of how we fit in the larger infrastructure. If you start out looking at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, one of those centers is Medicaid. And it is the Center for Medicaid and CHIP Services. That's the center I'm in. And then within that center are several groups. One of those groups is the Disabled and Elderly Health Programs Group, and I am one of 2 deputy directors in that group. So in the Disabled and Elderly Health Programs Group are all of the Medicaid benefits. We have policy direction for the entire Medicaid benefit package. We also work with our state Medicaid agency partners as they operationalize the provision of Medicaid benefits. Those benefits include long-term services and supports, both in institutions and in home and community-based settings. We also have Medicaid managed care as the delivery system to oversee in this group. And there's obviously a lot of linkage between a managed care delivery system and the provision of long-term services and supports. And so we do our best to make sure that the delivery system and the services lay together in a way that still makes sure individuals are receiving the services they have been assessed to need. And sometimes there can be some fits and starts there. And so that is a continuing priority of ours. And so we also have some of the grant programs that you might be familiar with. Money Follows the Person has been around for several years, helping individuals transition out of primarily nursing homes and establish residency and receive good services in the community. And you can imagine that as we are all marking the 1-year point of being in a global pandemic and a public health emergency, all of these services that seek to, or all of these initiatives that seek to make sure individuals are supported in the settings in which they want to be, are taking on even more importance than they had before any of us had ever heard the term COVID. And so I'm going to be talking to you today about a couple of topics that I know are very high on your radar screen. They are very high on ours as well. Some of them are directly related to the pandemic, or if not, they are at least informed by the pandemic. And many of these priorities have been long-term goals that I know we share, you and we in CMS share. So let me first start off by talking about the elephant in the room, which is the public health emergency. There are certainly reasons to be hopeful as the vaccine rollout continues and states are making great progress in reaching populations to actually immunize them. If depending on the state you're in, that kind of tells the story about who is prioritized for vaccine administration, what kind of schedule those distributions are on. I know in my own state of Maryland, I was helping my mom get appointments and look forward to becoming vaccinated myself later next month when the categories open up. It's been a real adventure as the vaccines have rolled out, and you should know that vaccine administration, including for individuals with disabilities, is very high on our priority list. We are devoting a significant amount of time to making sure that our state partners understand that there are individuals in the Medicaid program who need to have some special parameters or special supports brought to the table to make sure they are offered an opportunity to be vaccinated and offered assistance in actually getting the vaccine. So I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I'll talk about some of the other longer term home and community-based services initiatives that I know you're familiar with because I've spoken to many of you about them. So to stick with COVID for a minute, we have been working very closely, as I said, with our state partners and with CDC at the federal level to make sure that as decisions are being made about vaccination prioritization, those decisions are mainly made in local health departments in states. Sometimes the governor's office is really taking control of the vaccination strategy. And those folks may or may not be aware of all the different settings that individuals with a disability might be residing in. I think the people who are in nursing homes are top of mind for a lot of those state leaders, but individuals who are in ICFs, individuals who are older adults or people with a disability in all sorts of varieties of home and community-based settings may or may not be on their radar screen. And so CMS and Medicaid agencies and the agencies overseeing programs for older adults and people with intellectual disabilities are really working quite hard to make sure that the decision makers at the state level, as they are making strategies for vaccine rollout, really understand where populations of people are. And we also know that the typical appointment structure, spending, many hours in some cases online trying to snag an appointment, or even physically getting to a vaccine administration site is going to be logistically very difficult for a lot of individuals that you and we both care about. And so how do we make sure that the models are there and being implemented to either bring the vaccine to them, or to make sure that supports are there to help individuals go to a vaccination site? We've been talking to our state partners about Medicaid's non-emergency medical transportation benefit and how that can be used to physically transport someone from their home to a vaccination site, either a mass vaccination site or a smaller one at a community pharmacy, for example. And we've also been talking about how to mobilize the delivery of vaccines to the settings in which people are. You've probably heard a lot about some of the nursing home partnerships where pharmacy representatives will come into the nursing home and administer vaccines there. That's happening much more sporadically for other populations. And so the goal of making sure that states are being intentional yet nimble in their vaccine strategies is really one of our top priorities. And so understand that we are having those conversations. Certainly, those conversations will be aided by you all as stakeholders and informed stakeholders in your states, and making sure that you're contacting your local health departments, your governor's offices to say, we are here and here's the assistance we're going to need in order to make sure these people get vaccinated to the extent they want to be vaccinated. We are also having all sorts of conversations around vaccine hesitancy, trying to remove misinformation that might be creating concerns about the safety of the COVID vaccine. Certainly CMS is not out front in talking about the clinical composition of the vaccine or how the vaccine was put together. Our goal is really to make sure that in the Medicaid program, states have the federal flexibility and the tools they need to be able to make decisions to get the vaccine into the locations across the state that are going to reach the most people. And for those people who are harder to reach, that they are on the state's radar screen and specific strategies are being stood up to provide the vaccine to those people. So let me talk now about, let me switch from COVID to priorities in the long-term care and home and community-based services space that certainly have been around for many, many years. But the public health emergency has done nothing but shine an even brighter spotlight on the need to make sure that people are receiving safe and quality care, no matter where they are, whether they're in institutions in an intermediate care facility, or if they are in a home and community-based services program. You've probably heard the term rebalancing before. That certainly is not a new term, and nothing about nothing about the public health emergency is bringing a different spin on rebalancing, but it is certainly bringing new attention and energy on the rebalancing conversation. Rebalancing is kind of a generic term and a bit of a misnomer. Rebalancing indicates that we at one point had system equity, lost it, and now we need to get it back. The truth is, there's always been a push-pull in the long-term care conversations around what is the appropriate utilization and reliance on institutions, and what is the appropriate utilization and reliance on non-institutional home and community-based care. But the rebalancing term is really meant to encompass all of these activities that are designed to make sure that states and communities have the tools they need to ensure that the home and community-based services system is strong and sustainable and set up to meet the needs of all of the people who want to be residing in the community. And that's actually a very hard conversation to have. because as you know, the population of individuals receiving long-term care, whether it's Medicaid funded or not, is extremely diverse. And the long-term care system, the home and community-based services system, has to be set up in such a way that individuals across the spectrum of age are supported, across the spectrum of multiple different types of disabilities are supported, and individuals with the most significant support needs are supported, not just occasionally, but every single day. And that's a tall order. And even though rebalancing has been around for a long time, or the idea of it, we're hard pressed to say, here's a state that has really knocked it out of the park. Now, that's a little unfair to say as a blanket statement. There are some states that have really moved the ball in a significant way for some populations. And in fact, individuals with intellectual disabilities have long been the example of real systems change that has happened to bring the majority of services received by those individuals into the community. But that doesn't mean that all is well, and that we can relax our oversight of the community-based infrastructure for those individuals. And there's also a lot of work that needs to happen on the older adult side and individuals with physical disabilities. There's still a lot of those people being served in institutions, people who want to be in the community and could be served in the community with some enhancements to the HCBS infrastructure. So that's what we're talking about when we mention rebalancing, really making sure that states and the provider networks have the tools they need and the right partnerships developed to have a sustainable infrastructure that is going to follow individuals through their lifespan, through changes, ebbs and flows in healthcare conditions, and really help individuals with the types of individual autonomy and decision-making that they should be experiencing in the community. That's not to say that a rebalancing conversation is all about eradicating institutions from this country. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that people have choices and that people who want to be in the community and could be served in the community are given the opportunity to be there. We know that there are some people for some periods of time for whom an institution might be the most appropriate placement. And in that regard, services that are provided to people in institutions also have to be of top quality. And we have to make sure that the infrastructure on the institutional side is sufficient to maintain that quality and maintain that safety. And since we are coming out of, or hopefully on the downward slope of a public health emergency, the need to ensure good clinical care and infection control has really risen to be premier in the minds of a lot of stakeholders, including us in the federal government. How do we make sure that institutions are providing the right kind of clinical oversight? At the same time, we're now almost a year into some really restrictive practices based on the need to ensure infection control that have really restricted visitation policies, and understanding the impact of social isolation is something that I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg on. There were measures taken out of good clinical judgment and necessity as we were in the early days of a global pandemic that really changed the daily lives of people in institutions. And the impacts of that, I think, will continue to be felt for a while. The effects of being isolated are real and they can be devastating. And so how can we marry the need to provide good clinical care and good infection control with the need to make sure we are also supporting the cognitive and emotional needs of people who are there? That is a conversation that will only continue, and stakeholders like you will have a seat at the table to continue those conversations. So let me talk a little bit about some other things in the home and community-based services space. I want to talk a little bit about quality of care and quality measures, because as we continue to have these rebalancing conversations and push for the right kind of infrastructure in both institutions and the home and community-based settings, we need to make sure that the services being delivered in the institutional side and on the HCBS side are of high quality. To be pushing for community placements and not be sure that the services are meeting the needs of individuals who are relying on those services and supports, not only to address their medical care, but to address their behavioral health services, their community integration goals. That's really such a critical component of a well-functioning home and community-based system. And when you look at the quality measurement that has come before us, there are gaps. And the federal government really has not been involved in the development of performance measures that will be used in the provision of home and community-based services, the evaluation of performance metrics, really understanding how the receipt of home and community-based services is addressing beneficiary experience of care, goals, etc. You may be familiar with the fact that we issued a request for information last year on what we're calling a recommended measure set in the Medicaid funded home and community-based services space. I think a lot of stakeholders assume that we are going to be quickly moving to issuing some sort of regulation that mandates states incorporate these measure sets into their home and community-based services program. And we are really just at the beginning stages of thinking about what the ultimate recommended measure set would look like, or what the ultimate measure set would look like. So at least for the foreseeable future, these really are optional performance metrics that we are hoping states will embrace and adopt and embed into their home and community-based services programs. Those recommended measure sets are really designed to identify the factors that distinguish home and community-based services from institutional care. So making sure that the person-centered service plan is developed in accordance with our expected criteria. And more importantly, that the person-centered service plan is an accurate reflection of each beneficiary's service needs, goals, preferences, desires for community integration. That's really at the heart of home and community-based care, the person-centered service plan, and making sure that the services and supports that Medicaid is paying for are meeting the needs and the preferences outlined in that person-centered service plan. So are there performance measures that give us confidence that that person-centered service plan is actually happening and people are receiving the services that they've been assessed to need and outlined in that person-centered service plan? And then we go on from there to talk about experience of care and the use of self-direction and access to services. These are not, this is not a simple conversation, but we think, or we hope, that these measure domains really get to the heart of what it means to be living in your community. And we hope that these recommended measures will provide some early warning signals if these components of a functional HCBS system are not being met, and confidence that they are being met in such a way that individuals relying on these services really do have their needs met and are supported in exercising their choices and control in the community as well. So many steps are still to come. We received a fair amount of comments in response to the request for information last year. We have been slowed a little in turning those comments around into the next step. You can imagine that our attention is split in any given day between very short-term critical COVID-related activities and trying to also keep moving these longer-term priorities that were important even before the advent of the public health emergency. And so we have been held up a little in our timelines, but we do hope to be issuing some public guidance, distilling the comments that we received into a more concrete next step. And so be on the lookout for that. And then the other thing that I wanted to hit on as it relates to quality care is making sure that the services that Medicaid funds that are listed in the Social Security Act and that provide kind of the roadmap for states to be able to come to CMS and say, this is the cohort of services I want to provide to my population of individuals. The goal with the recommended measure set is also to make sure that those services are meeting the needs of individuals. States in the state Medicaid agency and in the state agencies that operate programs for different populations, there's an enormous amount of discretion and autonomy given to the states in looking at the services that are coverable in the Medicaid HCBS space and turning that into services that are actually provided on the ground to both children and adults. And so we do, when a state comes to us and says, here's the cohort of services that I want to provide, we look at that request to make sure it's in line with what's in the statute and our regulations and our guidance to make sure it's being provided in accordance with the Medicaid federal framework. But a lot of the magic happens on the ground as states are making their decisions in what kinds of services to offer. And so you as stakeholders also have a really critical voice to make sure that you are communicating it to your state if there are gaps in service availability that you're encountering or particular support needs that you think Medicaid can be addressing that are not offered in today's service menu. So yes, actually, Ms. Harris is from CMS. I've been seeing a lot of comments whizzing back and forth, and I promise you, I have not really been paying attention to all of them. I'll try to catch up. That one caught my eye. So I am indeed from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. I am your friendly neighborhood fed, and you can certainly use me as a conduit into the agency if you've got additional questions. So, as we make sure that that the Medicaid funded home and community-based services are meeting the goals of Medicaid recipients, the other aspect of service provision that we want to be mindful of is how these services are meeting the needs of caregivers, be it paid caregivers who might be living with an individual, or what's more likely, family caregivers who are not being paid, but who are bearing an awful lot of responsibility for the day-to-day lives of Medicaid beneficiaries. And so I did want to spend a couple of minutes talking about caregiver supports that are authorized in the Medicaid program, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of discrepancy between what services are titled and the purposes that those services can bring and the functions those services can fill in the lives of beneficiaries and caregivers. If you look in the Social Security Act for Medicaid, you won't find any service called caregiver supports. But if you look at the actual services that Medicaid can authorize in the home and community-based services space, you'll find a lot of services that have indirect benefits on caregivers. And to the extent your state is offering those services, I do encourage you to take a look at that service menu to see how those services and supports might support you all as family members and potential unpaid caregivers. And I'll hit just a couple of highlights of what those services might look like. Medicaid, under a home and community-based services program, will fund respite care. And respite is literally sometimes a saving grace to individuals who are on call, formally or informally, almost 24 hours a day. I have never had to be a full-time or even part-time caregiver to a family member, but I certainly have a lot of friends and other family members who have had to play that role in a way that was almost a full-time job. And to the extent that those people are also employed outside the home, it's really having two full-time jobs. And so the role of the respite benefit is to give the primary caregivers a breather and have the individual who needs supporting temporarily be in another setting. And states have a lot of discretion as to what those other settings might look like. Respite might come in the form of 2 hours a week. So a caregiver can go grocery shopping or get their own haircut or whatever. Or it could be in the form of a more concerted period of time for a caregiver to be out of town or on vacation or something like that. And so the goal obviously is to make sure that the Medicaid beneficiary is receiving quality care while they are in a respite situation. But certainly it is a service that is available. And to the extent it's not provided, that's something that you can be having a conversation with your state about. There are also any number of other Medicaid services that can alleviate the burden being placed on caregivers and family members. There are benefits that authorize the provision of personal care where someone can come into the home and assist in bathing and toileting and dressing and eating for individuals who need that kind of assistance. There are some day programs that can provide supports during the day, either with an eye toward eventual employment or more like a socially focused service. And that can facilitate a caregiver being able to be employed outside the home or to have, again, some breaks in their caregiving responsibilities. Any number of Medicaid services, even if you don't find the word caregiver in them, can be implemented in such a way that that caregivers can really feel themselves being supported and have an extra circle of clinical or other kind of supports wrap around them so that they're not shouldering all of the responsibility alone. So I'm happy to pull that thread with you all in the Q&A session. And then the last thing I'll talk about under the heading of HCBS is the settings rule. Excuse me. The home and community-based settings regulation is something that I know many of you are familiar with. I've had a lot of offline conversations with you, and I know that you interpret it as kind of a mixed bag. And so I'll talk for a minute about its general premise, and then I'll segue quickly into some of the components of it that I think are always attracting the most attention. So the settings rule criteria was designed based on extensive stakeholder collaboration, because we were getting more and more evidence that as time was passing, since the home and community-based services authorities were added to the Medicaid menu, a lot of the settings in which those services were being provided were not really distinguishable from institutional settings in terms of a regimented schedule and individuals receiving services not really being supported to make their own decisions about how they were living or how they were receiving services during the day. And regardless of how you feel about the role of institutions or the role of home and community-based services, I hope it's an agreed upon point that there should be differentiation between the two. And people deserve quality services wherever they are. That is a fundamental premise and backdrop to this whole conversation. But people who are receiving services that are designed to be provided in a home and community-based setting, and services that are designed to support individuals to maintain their community participation, really should be experiencing the supports they need to make that a reality and not just words on a page. And so the criteria of a home and community-based setting was born and finalized in regulations about exactly this time of year in 2014. So that was 7 whole years ago. Sometimes it feels like it was 2 weeks ago. Sometimes it feels like it was 100 years ago. And we have been working with states and providers and families and stakeholders to make sure that those provisions are actually meaningful and come to life. And what we have all come to learn is that this is a much longer process than we thought. And there are, if you look at the criteria, some of it spans from very philosophical criteria, such as individuals are treated with dignity and respect, individuals are free from coercion and restraint, individuals are supported to exercise their own autonomy and decision-making. Also, it spans into very concrete criteria. Individuals are able to decorate their own space if they're living in a residential setting. Individuals have access to food and visitors at any time. That doesn't mean that this is a one-size-fits-all set of criteria that are applied to everyone receiving Medicaid-funded HCBS. That would be really the ultimate fallacy. The prevailing thought behind all of this is that it's impossible to have a one-size-fits-all approach. The criteria are designed to be the cornerstone of a home and community-based setting, as is the person-centered service plan process. And how a specific individual experiences their community is going to come down to what that individual's goals and preferences are, what that individual's supports needs are, the resources that are available in that person's life, and the resources available where that person is. And that by default is a very person-specific, individualized conversation. And so it might be that one individual is really happy just being supported to be in their own home. They don't need to go out and fully experience the community. They like to be supported to go to a couple of places. They like to go to a particular grocery store, to get their haircut at a particular place, to go to a particular church or house of worship, and they'll be perfectly happy. Someone else could find happiness in another type of congregate setting, and that's perfectly fine as long as those individuals are supported to make their own choices and to engage with their larger community as they want to. And then some other individuals, based on their health care or based on their conditions, might need extensive supports, just being able to leave their location and go into the community to do anything. And that also is articulated in a person-centered service plan. We don't purport to know what is best for any individual receiving Medicaid services. What we have as our obligation is to make sure that the system is set up with parameters that facilitate individuals making those choices, and that the providers of Medicaid funded services see each individual that they are serving as an individual, and they know what that individual finds most meaningful in his or her life. And that's also a pretty complicated conversation. It really shouldn't be, but it is, because there are so many variables that we know are on the plate of our provider network, and being able to be person specific and have a nimbleness in the way that they deliver services is a complicated equation. But our goal is that the settings regulation and that the technical assistance that we're able to provide states and providers demystifies some of this and breaks it down into its component pieces that are able to stand up. There is a component of the settings regulation that talks about services that are presumptively institutional, or settings that are presumptively institutional. And I think that's where a lot of you have been focused. There's language that says CMS has to give a presumptively institutional setting a heightened scrutiny review. And that has been the focus of a lot of conversations, a lot of technical assistance, guidance issued from CMS. We continue to be looking at the right way to implement the heightened scrutiny provisions to make sure that they have the correct amount of oversight at the state and federal level, but that they also are not done in a way to eliminate the offering of those types of settings, as long as those settings meet the criteria of the home and community-based settings. There is nothing that has come out of CMS to say that a presumptively institutional setting cannot meet the settings criteria. But it just means that there might need to be an extra look at those settings. And it's also equally as critical to understand the strategy your state has in implementing the settings regulation. They are also a decider in the types of providers that they are going to be doing business with. And so understanding how your state is implementing the settings rule is also pretty critical. I want to spend just 2 more minutes talking, and then I'm going to stop because I'd like to have a Q&A session with some of you. And I know that that there is interest in talking about the ICF benefit in Medicaid, intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And so the ICF benefit has a couple of different identities in the statute. It is an optional service for states to choose to implement. And I say optional to distinguish it from nursing homes. Nursing homes are a mandatory benefit in Medicaid, which means that states have to offer the nursing home benefit. The ICF benefit is technically optional. It is not optional for children, however, because it is a service that is listed in the 1905A benefits. If you look at section 1905A, in the Social Security Act, you will find a list of Medicaid services, and Congress has indicated which among that list are mandatory and which are optional. ICFs are on that list, but anything in the list of 1905A services becomes mandatory for children under the age of 21 when medically necessary. So we've got ICFs as an optional benefit category in Medicaid. However, almost every state in the country, in fact, I think every state in the country, offers services to people who would otherwise be served in an ICF through a home and community-based services waiver. And if a state that is offering home and community-based services to people who meet an ICF level of care have to offer the ICF services as well. And so because every state is providing waiver services, every state needs to provide that alternative and that option to receive services in an intermediate care facility. You have noticed, I know, that not every state has ICF providers within its borders. And that's legitimate. A state has to offer ICF care. It doesn't mean a state has to actually do business with an ICF provider within the borders of that state. The state's obligation is to make sure that a Medicaid beneficiary who meets the criteria for ICF level of care and who desires ICF placement gets that placement. And that placement could be in a facility in another state. Understanding the practical implications of a loved one being in a state separate from where his or her support system is, the service mandate is that the service be available, not that it be provided in your home state. You're probably also familiar with some of the Olmstead lawsuits and the actions taken by the Department of Justice. I don't claim to speak for the Department of Justice. I am not affiliated with them. My understanding of those lawsuits is not, again, to eradicate ICFs from the landscape. It's to make sure that the home and community-based services system is set up in such a way that individuals who want to be served in the community and can be served in the community are not forced into an ICF. And it's that kind of mentality that is driving some of the settlement actions that sometimes take a few years to bring to fruition, and makes the state offer options to residing in an ICF. But I hope you don't take from those actions or from CMS actions that we are anti-institution. I think we get accused of that a fair amount. We're also not pro-institution. We are pro-systemic change, and we are for individuals being given the option of whether to be in a home and community-based setting or whether to be in an institution. Those options need to be real. Those options need to both provide quality services, and those options both need to be sustainable. So with that, I'm going to stop. We have 15 minutes left. I apologize that I do have a hard stop at 2 o'clock my time, but I am happy to try to attempt. Jill, Amy, I'm not sure how you want to try to tackle the
Thank you,
the
Melissa.
Q&A.
Amy, Amy's going to pitch you as many questions as you can. If you can kind of rapid fire answer as many as you can. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, I'm seeing I'm going to just pick up where you left off, Melissa, because I think that's a huge concern for our listeners, our watchers today. And a lot of people have expressed the question. You know, we're very happy that you've expressed this commitment to the continuum of care and the range of options, but in many states, like my states, that's not what our Office of Developmental Programs is saying. And often our state disability agencies are, you know, kind of throwing, you know, saying CMS settings rule, we can't do it. So what is your advice to families who are advocating for maybe larger settings that are not permitted in their states because they're basically saying CMS doesn't allow it? What is CMS's responsibility to educate states on what's permitted?
So what I have said to many a state audience is that CMS will support a state that makes an implementation decision that goes above and beyond what is in the federal settings regulation. The way it normally works in Medicaid is that there are federal standards and there are state standards. Federal standards always have to be met. A state can choose to look at those federal standards as the ceiling or as the floor. So we have said to a state, we will support you if you want to add on additional requirements above and beyond the federal settings rule. What we won't support you to do is add on additional requirements and then say that they are a directive of CMS. And so, to the extent that you are hearing a particular decision placed at the feet of CMS that you don't think is in our federal regulation, then we want to hear about that. States are in the proper role of states is to own the implementation strategy for the settings regulation. Absolutely. And states have a lot of discretion about how they're going to do that. But if they're saying CMS won't let me do X, or CMS is making me do Y, and you don't see that, in the settings rule, then we do want to know about that. It might be an issue of semantics, or it might be a conversation that we need to have with the state, and we've had those in the past. To the extent you can link back what the state is saying to what's in the settings regulation, then they're correct in saying that that's part of the federal expectations. If it seems a little beyond that, then you can certainly circle around with us.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question that I've seen several different variants of. What recourse do individuals have who choose HCBS, are approved for services, but who are unable to receive services because the state claims no providers available for years? Or what we see a lot is your kid its behaviors are too severe. We don't have any providers who are willing to accept your child. Do states have an obligation to maintain network adequacy?
That is one of the final Jeopardy questions. I mean, so to speak. I mean, it's really a conundrum, because the HCBS system is supposed to be available for anyone who chooses to receive services in the community. And yet we know that individuals with really significant challenges, and so often behavioral challenges are at the top of the list in terms of complicating factors, we know that it can be very hard to find providers who are qualified to provide sustainable quality care. I don't have a pithy silver bullet answer. States are expected to be recruiting sufficient providers. Provider capacity, provider sustainability, provider infrastructure is one of the key facets of all of our rebalancing conversations. It's not sufficient just to have a good amount of providers for people who just need minor amounts of support. One of the ways in making HCBS placement a reality for people is having providers with real skills for more complex individuals. It's a work in progress. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. You know it as well as I do. That is a work in progress in a lot of areas. I think states would welcome having some of these challenges highlighted if there are particular skill sets that are missing from a state's current provider network. Having that information distilled for them, I think, would be helpful. If there are examples of providers who possess those skills, that would also be helpful. I think anytime you can bring information to a state that's not just an expression of the problem, but examples of how to go about solving that problem, even if it's in chunks, I think is always so welcome. That kind of same conversation is welcome at the federal level as well. But these are really gnarly issues. And to the extent that you all, as people who are experiencing what's happening on the ground, can bring some suggestions for improvement, all the better.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's another question. Performance measures cannot be accomplished with diminishing incentive wages and eroding retention of direct support staff. So this goes to the DSP crisis that we're all feeling very acutely. And how can you expect to implement these measures in the face of this crisis?
I'm very grateful for that question, because one of the things I can't believe I forgot to mention that is a top priority for us at this moment is working to issue guidance to implement one of the provisions of the American Rescue Plan Act that passed on the 11th of this month, I think. One of those provisions is extra federal funding for home and community-based services. It's in the form of 10 percentage points of extra federal match that a whole lot of services that were listed in statute get. And what states are expected to do with this infusion of extra federal dollars is to implement actions that go above and beyond what they're currently doing in the HCBS space. And one of the things that is always top of mind when we're talking about HCBS investments is direct service worker availability, sustainability. Take-home wages for the direct service workforce has got to be at the forefront of the decisions that states are making as they implement a plan on how to use these extra dollars. If you look at the statute in the American Rescue Plan Act, it's very broad. It only indicates that states are to use these extra federal funds in ways that supplement, not supplant, current state funding. And we will be issuing guidance as quickly as possible because this extra funding kicks in next Thursday, April 1st, and states get that extra funding for 1 calendar year. States also are expected to use that extra funding in a way that enhances the system. And one of the things that will be prominently featured as a suggestion to states is looking at ways to shore up the direct service worker network. Career ladders, career enhancements, financial stability, all top tier issues, because we know that this is at crisis levels in every state. It was before a global pandemic. That certainly has not helped. And so that is absolutely part of our conversation and thinking at the federal level. It's very high up on the list of state priorities as well in their larger rebalancing conversations and as they work to implement this time-limited and enhanced federal funding.
Okay, great. Here I'm going to lump a couple questions together since we only have a few more minutes left. Some parents are wondering about what CMS's position on, in particular, AAC devices for individuals and staff in rehabilitation and coverage of ABA for adults. Does your agency have a position on the funding of these services?
So augmentative assistance, is that what the AA means? Like communicative?
Assistive communication.
So in the there's a couple of categories that could authorize those things. There are in the kind of traditional Medicaid space, there's the home health benefit that authorizes what's akin to a durable medical equipment benefit. It's called supplies, equipment, and appliances. And so some of those augmented communication devices might be authorized under that benefit. That's a mandatory benefit for both children and adults. And so it's worth seeing if those kind of devices can be authorized there. If not, some of the home and community-based services programs, either the 1915C waiver program or a state plan program, can also authorize those services. Now, a need for that kind of device needs to be assessed based on an individual's need for that service. The care plan needs to include mention of it, but there are authorities that make those types of devices available. And then same thing for ABA. So services for adults with autism is a bit of a different story than children. And this is one of those areas where the cliff at the age of 21 becomes very real. So services to treat an autism spectrum disorder are part of the mandate that states have to provide all medically necessary services to individuals under 21. There is not a specific mandate to provide a particular type of service like ABA. There is no mandate in Medicaid that ABA be provided to anyone, child or adult. But the state needs to have services available for the treatment of an autism spectrum disorder. If it's not ABA, then it's got to be something else. And the state needs to tell you what they are covering for the service, for the treatment of an autism service disorder. It could be ABA. It could be a compilation of other services that are authorized throughout the Medicaid menu. For someone who hits that age of 21, they are no longer under that protection of all medically necessary state plan services, and they receive the services that the Medicaid agency offers to adults. And that might look very different, particularly in the autism space. And so it's pretty critical to understand what your state offers to adults with autism. Now, the service package, there are many states that have home and community-based waiver programs that provide services to older individuals with autism. Whether ABA is in that service package is again a state decision. But if there's a waiver targeting individuals with autism, then there should be other services. If not ABA, then something else. But that's also worth having a conversation with your state about. If there's a particular treatment that a state is not offering, you might want to have a conversation with a case manager, with your with your service provider to say, what about this service? Has this service been considered and the state decided not to offer it? Should the service be considered anew or again? States still have a lot of discretion, but even for the adult population with autism, there are a lot of services, both optional and mandatory, that can be brought together to authorize a lot of meaningful services.
Well, that is an excellent lead-in to my next question, because the question is, you mentioned having a conversation with your state, which you just mentioned again. This was from earlier, but the folks at Mass Health do not speak to families. And I'm sure that this is not just unique to Massachusetts. I think a lot of families are feeling frustration when they go to their state agencies with these issues and feel that they are not being heard. So how do you get the states, how do you take these issues to the states and get them to engage?
Well, it's a good question. I would say a couple of things. Most states have ombudsman programs. These are protection and advocacy organizations, or they might be called by another title, but they should have connections to the state agencies in a way that individual beneficiaries and families might. I never like to hear that people are having trouble getting the attention of their state. Stakeholder engagement is something that states are differently good at. Some are really excel in it, and others don't give it the kind of time that it really deserves. But there are inroads that can be made through various avenues. Your case manager, the primary care team, the people in the long-term care system, and then these ombudsman programs. And if you're really having continued trouble, there are resources at the Administration for Community Living that also could be of assistance in reaching states. And it might not be the Medicaid agency that is your end audience. It often is. But like I said, there are state agencies that oversee programs for particular populations that are often on a peer level with the state Medicaid agency. So there's each state has an agency for an agency overseeing programs for people with developmental disabilities. They might be easier to reach, and they certainly have relationships with the state Medicaid agency. If you're absolutely having trouble, then you can reach out to CMS to say, I seem to be, hitting a brick wall. We certainly encourage our state Medicaid partners to have open lines of communication with their beneficiary communities. I mean, that's how they are going to be kept apprised in the most real time about how things are going. To the extent you're really having issues and those avenues I've suggested are not panning out, you can always come to us. Well, so I apologize. I've got to jump to another meeting, but I really am quite grateful, that you were able to switch around my topic or my session time to accommodate this next meeting when I contacted you 2 days ago, Jill, to ask for this favor, and really glad to be able to have a conversation with you all. I'm happy to see some familiar faces. This is an important topic and it's not going anywhere. So I would welcome an opportunity to speak with you all again.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you, Amy. Before we run to our quick break, I do want to ask that because we have so many questions, and I realize that Melissa's not here to answer them, but I invite the panelists to respond to the questions to the extent that you can. And then we are going to take a break. I will come back in 10 minutes and we will have our next keynote speaker, Walter Zahorodny, and then move on to our final session, which is our expert roundtable. Okay, so signing off for the break. We'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
So we're not going to have a transcript or anything of this. This is just like recorded. That's what they get, right?
Sorry, Amy?
I said, this is recorded and will be on our website, but that's.
Yes, and we had just resumed recording. Okay, everyone, welcome back from our break. We are going to move on to our next session. And I will introduce, in fact, I'm going to speak briefly before moving on to Dr. Zahorodny. So our next session is on the continuing surge, autism data and its implications for the future. Understanding the autism population, not just the numbers, but the characteristics and the needs for people in this population is exceedingly important. And it's not discussed enough, in my opinion. Hold on, I'm having just a small technical glitch. 1 second. Almost there. Almost there. Okay. All right. Moving on. The autism tsunami. There's a lot of talk about the autism increase, the autism epidemic, the autism tsunami, the autism surge, whatever you want to call it. It is absolutely a real phenomenon. It has become popular to talk about the autism increase as something of an artifact of increased awareness or increased or diagnostic shifts or population changes. But no, in reality, the data is very consistent actually around the world that the increase is real and cannot be explained by what we call non-etiological factors or social factors. It has received insufficient attention. I believe that there is a certain amount of autism fatigue in the general public. There's a lack of explanation for what is causing this. And of course, people are very concerned about provoking kind of anti-vaccine sentiment because the increase, unfortunately, has been associated with a vaccine hypothesis, which has been soundly disproven. So unfortunately, the most consistent messaging we receive in the media, to the extent they even pay attention to this anymore at all, is out of denial, trivialization, or mischaracterization of research studies. But we're facing an extremely serious and growing national crisis. And we must know the data if we're going to adequately prepare for the future. So I'm going to talk very quickly about data from California, which is, of course, our country's most populous state. We have about 13% of the population. Dr. Zahorodny is going to talk about national figures and also figures from New Jersey, the state where he lives and where he does his research. So our Department of Developmental Services is known for having the best autism data of any state. That's because we have something called the Lantermine Act. It's been around for decades, and it's required the state to maintain data about individuals with developmental disabilities, including autism. And if you can see here, the caseload growth of autism in the DDS system has grown 4,400%. Since mid-1980s, we are now past 133,000 cases in the DDS. Back in the 90s, when the caseload hit 16,000, the state kind of went berserk because it was such an unprecedented, such a huge number. That was 16,000 when we sounded the alarm. We're now at 133,000. So this is a different way of looking at the data. This isn't caseload. This is actually looking at cases in the system by birth year. And you can see every year, pretty much we see an increase, a kind of striking increase, not a modest increase, in autism cases. So there were about 200 cases, from the 80s, but now we're nearing 8,000 cases born each year. And this, of course, has a dramatic implication for the future. If we compare California's rates to the CDC rates, you can see the CDC rates, which are based on a national sample, are in the orange. You can see that's very significantly higher than the rates we have in the California DDS. But that's to be expected because in the California DDS, we are only serving those with more severe forms of autism. It's not the broader spectrum at all. You have to have a very substantial developmental disability. And in fact, the criteria for inclusion in California's DDS became more stringent in 2003. People think, oh, it's all broadening of diagnostics, it's awareness. It's really not, because in this system, you are comparing apples to apples. And there's been no evidence for a whole huge population of adults that have been missed who have DDS eligible autism. If you look at the education stats, it's a similar trend. This just compares 1990 to 2018. This is broader definition autism, used in the schools and not the more narrow definition. But again, a dramatic increase. So my point is, well, this data is really important. And we probably should be analyzing it in order to project future needs. And this is something that I did, and I admit I'm not a statistician. This is sort of a back of the envelope calculation using very, very, very conservative projections and assumptions behind this drill. But basically, I'm interested in the number of autism cases we have with aged parents, because if you look now in California's population, there are very few autism cases, with aged parents, right? The vast majority of the population is younger. But let's talk about 30 years, right, in the future. Well, what we see, again, with very conservative assumptions, is about a 20-fold increase, if not more, right, in these autism cases that have aged parents. And those are parents who have waning ability to care for their children, or who might, be chronically ill, who might have passed away. So, if we're looking at a 20-fold increase in that population, that's very serious. That says to me that we need to increase 20-fold, right, the capacity in our system. So with that, that's a quick overview of California data. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Zahorodny now. Dr. Zahorodny is, I'm going to do a stop share. Sorry. Dr. Zahorodny, I want to make sure that you're here.
I'm here.
Okay, oh, there you are. Perfect. Okay. Dr. Zahorodny has been working with the CDC on collecting data in the state of New Jersey, and has published several papers about autism trends, and we're very happy to have him here today.
Thanks a lot, Jill. Glad to join your group and share findings from New Jersey, the ADAM network, and to bring some new evidence to you from New Jersey.
You can, if you want, do slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll make it full screen for folks. Or not.
Huh.
You can,
Trying that.
yeah, if you go to slideshow, and then it should say full screen.
You can
Play
hit the
from
icon that
start.
says play from start.
Yeah, play from start. Just
All the
go
way on the
to
left.
There you go. That should work. There you go.
Okay. So thank you so much. I'm going to try to condense a lot of information from about 20 years of surveillance. It is exactly 20 years actually now that the CDC established a multi-state autism surveillance system in the United States. They did that because of detecting high levels of autism in a town in New Jersey called Brick Township. And careful investigation indicated that autism affected about 3 times as many children in that town than was expected, given previous epidemiologic estimates. 3 times higher than expected, nonetheless was identified as 6.7 children with autism per 1,000. That's a good background number, a good place to start. we joined in 2000, and we completed so far 8 cycles of autism surveillance. We maintain the same region. We use the same methods and procedures consistently all the way through, the same definition for autism, so that our information, our data about autism in New Jersey could be comparable to that in other states, and also could be compared over time. In a way, you would expect little difference among states and little reason to have expectation of significant change over time. Previous studies never showed significant escalation in most developmental disorders, and some had actually gone down or plateaued. So we didn't know, but we monitored the same way. And in this depiction, you see about 2 decades of surveillance across many states, as I said, part of the ADAM network. And you don't have to look carefully to see a couple of clear things. One, across all the states, autism prevalence increased, and increased pretty significantly from the baseline period. The overall ADAM network estimate increased from 6 per thousand to 18.5 per thousand. So that's a 200% increase. New Jersey's depicted by the yellow line. And we started with autism prevalence higher, about 1%. And our prevalence estimate increased also 200%, so that by the 2016 surveillance cycle, our rate in New Jersey showed autism prevalence. Now, this is prevalence among 8-year-olds. That's the consistent cohort we focus on, prevalence of 3%. So these trends are consistent with other trends from lesser quality or less intense investigations. If one was to track Social Security disability claims for autism, or the parent survey, federal parent survey estimates, or any number of other indicators, IDEA data about autism, we would all be seeing the same upward trajectory of autism. So now I focus on New Jersey, since it's very likely that New Jersey has the highest estimates, because we have also the highest quality information and the most complete ascertainment. I show you 3 lines. Green line represents children classified with autism by the special education system. Red line represents children with autism who have an autism diagnosis from a community provider. And the blue line is what happens when you look actively for all children with autism. As you'd expect, the special education system has a specific definition for autism, which isn't tied to the diagnosis of autism, but rather to what portfolio of services would be best suited for the child. And that clearly shows an escalation over time, no doubt about it, and an escalation that continues even in 2016. All community providers have seen a very significant rise in their practice activities relevant to autism diagnosis or autism treatment. And if you were able to secure information from exhaustive review of medical sources, you'd find, again, autism prevalence increased very significantly, and you would estimate it at the 25 per thousand level in New Jersey, or at 2.5%. And as we do a lot to find all the cases of autism, there are, at 8 years of age, a significant number of children with autism who satisfy the definition of autism, but who haven't been diagnosed yet by a community provider. From the beginning, these children add another approximately 20% to the overall count of autism and to the overall prevalence estimate. The no-cost option for estimating autism prevalence, if one wants to do it, therefore, is just to go to the public record and determine how many children are classified with autism and what the population of the region's like in account, and then establish a rate. On the other hand, if you want a complete estimate, it's worth putting in the effort to get to the realization that autism has crossed the 3% level in the United States. This figure says much the same as the one I've described to you, but you see that the bottom line, which represents the trajectory of autism by diagnosis, while it goes all the way to 2018, while the surveillance estimate stops at 2016. That's because the ADAM network decided to change the rules of the methodology. And from 2018 forward, we're no longer doing active case finding. We're only recording in the ADAM network the number of children with autism by a previous diagnosis. And that means that all subsequent ADAM general averages and state-specific averages will probably be 20% lower than in reality. Autism is distributed. It's a complex disorder, as everyone says and knows. Many children with autism also have comorbid intellectual disability. That, of course, is a double disability or double issue, takes many more resources and entails many more struggles to provide for a child with two disabilities. And so when we break out children with autism who have intellectual disability, they're represented by the dashed lines, and we split them by wealth. You see that regardless of wealth, there's essentially a plateau in the proportion of children, number and proportion of children who have autism with intellectual disability. On the other hand, the solid lines, also segregated by wealth, show that highest prevalence is among children who have no intellectual disability and from high-income families, followed by mid-range and low SES families. Autism awareness has changed some aspects of practice and detection. However, it doesn't explain the difference so far. If we expect the normal trend to continue, you'll notice that the yellow line, which represents families in the middle range, is catching up to the estimate for the high SES groups. Over time, this will continue, and even the low SES group, I predict, will also, at a point, also intersect with both the mid-SES and high-range families. These plots, to me, suggest that even if nothing happens to continue driving the autism prevalence rates, that it's inevitable that they will increase upward as we begin to be able to pick up children from mid and lower SES families. We do a lot of intense case description in doing surveillance by this active process. It's not like we're just only estimating the prevalence of autism and determining how many children have it. We're trying to understand the relation of severity in different comorbid conditions or problems. And so we have a way of scaling and tracking autism severity impairment. This is not impairment due to intellectual disability or ADHD or other cofactors, just based on autism. And so in this figure, I seem to interpret that across the levels of severity, autism has increased between 2000 and 2010. All forms of autism have increased, and there's some back and forth, and it's expected, I would say, for the moderate level of impairment to be the highest occurring or most frequently occurring. And that's the case. But then after 2010, there's a shift in the pattern. And while the individuals who have severe impairment due to autism have plateaued. There is a continuing increase in a moderate, but to a greater extent among children who have mild level of impairment. Now, mild level of impairment doesn't mean atypicality, it means less disability. All these children satisfy the DSM-4 criteria and would be considered certainly disabled. Something no one's really seen before outside of our group, we decided to go a little deeper or possibly narrower into the picture. And we looked at the prevalence of autism in one of the largest New Jersey school districts over the last 6 years. This is a district with a population of 8-year-olds greater than 3,000 children. And we see a rapid escalation in prevalence from about 23 per thousand to close to 50 per thousand. This is a low-income community with a high proportion of residents, minorities, underrepresented. And so in a very brief period of time, the prevalence of autism has increased very significantly. Is that a fluke? Maybe this is an artifact of something having to do with wealth or something else. We looked at all of our districts and all of our counties, and again, looking at a large suburban district, also with a large population of children over the age of 8. This is a middle class, middle income community. We see a very similar, even steeper increase taking prevalence from 30 per thousand to 90 per thousand. You might think you're mishearing me. Maybe I'm not saying 90 per thousand. I am. That is a true estimate for this large district in 2016. The prevalence estimates through the ADAM network tend to provide averages. And even when we have New Jersey specific evidence, it's not broken down to anything at a granular level. So these already ongoing increases or observations of high autism prevalence have occurred. This is not something new. This is just something that hasn't been determined before. If this is a composite figure, the solid line shows reality that we've increased from 1% to 3% prevalence. But if we continue, no trend continues indefinitely. At some point, even autism will plateau as a phenomenon. But so far, we haven't seen the beginnings of the plateau. If we project based on annual increase, and so far the rate of annual increase has been 16% per year, you'll see that the steepness of the trajectory of prevalence is very sobering, very difficult to accept. We took another look by using only the two previous, the 2014 and 2016 cycle of autism monitoring in New Jersey, in projecting a model, which also shows a rapid continuous increase over time. Now, again, nothing continues indefinitely over time, but for the time being, we don't know what the true drivers of the autism increase are. So how do we know when it'll plateau or hopefully reverse? Even though we've been monitoring very carefully for 2 decades, in my opinion, we really don't yet understand or grasp the true scope of autism. We know it's increased across every group that we've looked at and that the increase has been unprecedented. There's no doubt of that. Better awareness does play a role, but it cannot explain a 200% increase. Over time, we'll make progress and we'll be able to detect better children from low income and minority communities better. We want that, but as we discover them better, more completely, that'll be also adding to the autism prevalence estimate. By 2029, which really isn't that far away, at the end of the decade, we would project that there'll be close to 4 million individuals in the US with autism spectrum disorder. We can ask questions many different ways, numbers, raw numbers, percents, projections, but is it possible for us to sustain ourselves as a society with 1 in 8 boys with autism or 1 in 32 girls with autism? So I'm not an economist, but using an excellent set of projections and models from Janet Kakir published last year, I'll bring your attention to the fact that for all individuals that were identified with autism in the period we've looked at over the lifetime across the United States, the cost will be something close to $7 trillion. The funding to care for individuals with autism, even up to 2020, is in the childhood, predominantly in the childhood period, but that will shift to greater and greater funding or support needed for adult care and to compensate for lost productivity. A lot of the increase of the expected cost of autism are derived from a significant increase in prevalence over time, which really is not understood. If we take a conservative model over time and have no increase in prevalence going forward, the estimated cost will be over $11 trillion by 2029. If we accelerate based on increasing autism prevalence, that will bring us closer to 15 trillion. Again, I'm not a mathematician, but the distance from 7 trillion to 15 trillion seems like it's very worthwhile to understand and to plan for or plan to go around. I'm not a public policy expert, but based on what I've seen about autism, I would bring to your attention a couple of ideas for possible consideration for policy actions or policy change. We must identify the modifiable risk factors for autism. A lot of work has been produced, but we still have no idea about this. Unless we identify the modifiable risk factors, autism prevalence will continue to escalate. We have to begin and to accelerate planning to support adults with autism. All children with autism, adolescents with autism will become adults with autism, and it takes a lot of, the disorder is very complex and it requires a very careful interaction of support. We must do something better to maximize early identification, because early identification leads to early interventions, and it's possible that earlier interventions will improve the outcome for many children or individuals with autism. There's still a very big socioeconomic disparity in autism identification. We have to do a lot to reverse that. In my opinion, the best way to reverse that is to use a universal autism screener repeatedly during the toddler and preschool period. We have to strengthen all the possible resources toward parent empowerment. Parents are in the center of the action and will always be there. And the parent engagement and parent activities probably make a significant difference, not only to the child, but to the outcome of the whole society. We must continue doing and sometimes expanding active surveillance in key regions. It's not enough to make an estimate based on how many children have been diagnosed or how many are identified. That's the shallowest form of exploration, and we can do a lot better than that and produce better quality information for the future. And in my opinion, we've had many efforts to build autism. A lot of them were necessary, but now there seems to be a lot of stasis, and continuing by committee and by some bureaucratic approach may not be as good as engaging the idea that there's a person in charge of the autism federal agenda or the research and epidemiology division so that we can have a coherent plan for the future, not just floating from decade to decade. If I wasn't from Eastern Europe, I'd call it an autism czar, but I prefer autism master. A lot of people in the background made our findings possible, but I'm especially grateful to Josephine Shanuda, who's helped me form some of these ideas and produce the presentation and the visualization of the work. I appreciate your time. I would love to continue in a conversation. Please feel free to contact me with any questions or comments or suggestions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahorodny. That was very sobering and scary and informative and important. It really is amazing to me how little attention this issue gets in the media and just sort of broadly in policy discourse. We have not seen a plateau, and your projections are very scary, you know, that we can come up to, 10% of all boys, right, having autism before we know it. So anyway, I want to get to a few questions. There's one issue that comes up a lot, which is these functional levels, right? Mild, moderate, severe. Sometimes people hear mild autism, and you pointed out that is still a disability. You can have somebody with an IQ of 70 and be considered not intellectually prepared, not intellectually impaired, but functionally they're very impaired. Can you talk about these levels and what they really mean on the ground?
Yeah, so the levels are different for every system. When possible, we try to we do retrieve from the record the most empirical or evidence-based data on the individual's functioning. But ultimately, because we use a process which incorporates the judgment of experts on top of the materials that have been recovered from the medical and educational sources, there is an interpretation involved. For purposes of our surveillance system, mild, moderate, severe was something that was meant to reflect the person's overall level of social relatedness and capacity over time. There's a lot of fluctuation. It is a subjective indicator. It's not something that can be that isn't referenced to some measurement. But in reality, the measurements that occur in the world that are accurate and valid for use in this way are offered by the standardized IQ tests and the adaptive functioning tests. Sometimes, so it is possible to have overall IQ at some level, but to have big differences between operations. A person could have average overall, but be very limited verbally, but pretty capable with visuospatial problem solving. In autism, or in individuals with autism, it's also regularly observed that overall IQ functioning is generally responsive and reflective of functional capacity. But when you're able to have also data from adaptive tests, one often finds that for the individual's level of intelligence, their ability to be independent or to perform without assistance is less than you would expect. A big advantage of that active case finding strategy is we get to ask those questions and usually have some answers because of the recruitment of the information that's already there. If we're to take a shortcut and only record information on individuals who have been diagnosed and only that, not describe their characteristics, I don't see how we could learn from them in a longitudinal way. The value of this approach too is that you can re-evaluate people that you identified at age 8, say at age 14, 15, or 20, because they'll continue to have health and education records which can undergo analysis. And then we could really see, are there changes? Are there different trajectories? Are there some interventions that work, possibly for one type or a subgroup of individual better than for others? So there's a lot of data in the materials that we absorb and reflect on. So whether you call it severe or profound autism, quite honestly, these concepts are relatively new for me. I think I only started hearing about them 2 or 3 years ago, but definitely when one takes the epidemiologic strategy, we have the specific definition can be adhered to. If people say the definition of severe or profound autism is or are XYZ, we can make that distinction and we can report on that group. That group is very important, and it is largely underrepresented and underappreciated by the wider public. In my opinion, there's a big misperception in the wider public, such that autism is some form of difference in temperament or orientation. It's not a disability. Definitely, it is a disability, and there are individuals who are disabled and will need resources indefinitely or resources of a specific type. So we'll want to know who they are so that we could make the right plans for them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zahorodny. I'm sorry that we're out of time because I could ask you 20 more questions, but hopefully we'll have you back and we can explore these numbers. And I do think we need to make much more of an effort to make these numbers public and make these numbers known, because the myth of no true increase in autism is so pervasive. And unfortunately, I think poisonous to the public discourse about what we need to do. Thank you so much. If you can stop sharing your screen, I am going to ask panelists for our roundtable to come on board, and you can unmute yourselves and you can show your video. Let's see. Okay. We are looking good. I think I'm going to do a gallery view. All right. I think the gang's all here. Thank you so much. So this is what we're going to do for our final session of the Policy Summit. It's called the Severe Autism Policy Roundtable. We have illustrious guests. Let's see, Maysoon, I'm going to actually turn off your video. Illustrious guests with us today. I will do a quick introduction, and then Amy and I will moderate this hopefully very constructive and lively roundtable. Angela Lello is the Senior Director of Public Policy for Autism Speaks. You can say hi. Hi, Angela. Lori Ireland is...
Jill, I can't do video. You're not letting me video.
Oh, what? Oh, geez. Okay, here, start your video.
Okay.
We want to see you. There she is. She is the chair of the Board of Directors of Autism Society of America. Kate McSweeny there's Kate. She is the Vice President of Government Affairs of ACCESS. Can you spell out what ACCESS is the acronym for?
Actually, it isn't an acronym.
Oh, okay.
It was an acronym a long time ago, and I can't even remember what it stood for.
Okay, so can you give a very quick, brief description of what ACCESS is? Because I think a lot of people don't know it.
Yes, we are an advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., focusing on expanding opportunities in residential and employment services and other services for people with significant disabilities. It's certainly my privilege to be here today.
Thank you, Kate. And maybe hold your mic/phone a little closer to your face when you're talking next time, but it's cool. Scott, there's Scott with the haircut. Hi, Scott. Scott is the chairman of the nonprofit Together for Choice. I think most of you have heard of Together for Choice. And Hugo Dwyer is the executive director of VOR. Hello, Hugo. Thank you for being with us. And Kim Mushino. Mushano, sorry. She is
That's all
Vice
right.
President of Public Policy, also for Autism Society of America. And as a former president of an Autism Society affiliate, I really appreciate having my colleagues here. So let's move right into it. We just have 6 questions, and then we're going to treat this sort of like a talk show, like a radio talk show. And we'll try to keep all these chatty people, to their time slots. All right, starting off with a super broad umbrella question. We have an ever-growing population of adults with significantly disabling autism and a fragmented system of care that cannot keep pace with demand. I think everybody agrees with that. From your point of view, what are the top policy priorities we should be targeting to expand options, both in terms of quantity and quality? Again, very broad, but this is just looking at what are the policy priorities. If we were going to fight for just 1 or 2 things, what would we fight for? Raise your hand if you want to speak, and I'll call on you. Lori Ireland.
Yes, I am representing the board of directors of the Autism Society of America, but since I have Kim with me, who is so well respected in this area, I am mostly going to defer to her. But because of course she goes through us, which is us, and she represents the broad spectrum of autism. Myself, I would say, to answer that question, would be that the federal government, the very first thing we need to do is the federal government needs to enforce their laws.
Okay.
Kim, what do you say?
And fund them and fully fund them. We have such a fragmented system. I think the things that you covered today, would be on our list. The home and community-based services and support system is extremely important, and it is something that the Autism Society is focusing on. Throughout COVID, we have been pushing every single relief bill to include significant funding for home and community-based services and supports, and housing and nutrition and on, but especially HCBS. And indeed, we finally, in the last American Rescue Plan, we did get, as someone mentioned earlier, a 10% boost in the federal Medicaid matching grant. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
All right, thank you. Next, who wants to raise their hand? Scott.
Yeah, I think it's very important that funding at the federal and state level increase for all forms of housing and other services. And the other thing that I think is critically important is that the government properly support a wide variety of housing options. HCBS is great. It works for lots of folks, but there are also a lot of folks for whom it does not work. And we need to retain a system that has a wide range of residential and vocational options, and that would include ICFs. It also would include broadening the definition of what qualifies as an HCBS setting, so that it includes farmsteads, campus settings, and other intentional communities. I think it's actually unfortunate that we have a system that sort of bifurcates housing into you're either a so-called institution or you're a community setting, when really we're talking about a continuum of types of housing. And all of those options, as long as they're high quality options and they're options that folks want and need, should be adequately supported by both the federal and state governments.
Yes, we certainly agree with that. We want to move to some other speakers. Anybody else want to speak on the broad policy question? Hugo, go ahead.
I have to add to what Scott just said. You have to remember that none of us know what's going to happen in life, but we do know that change is a constant. Your children, your loved ones will change. They may be fine at home right now. They may at some point or another require a group home. They may develop medical complications and require an ICF. So as you advocate, think of others. It's very easy to look at what we need in the present, but always keep an eye to what you may need in the future. Keep those options open. Fight for the options that others are fighting for, because we're in this together. We each have our own little field in this, but eventually we're going to need to support one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Ireland.
And I just wanted to say something else. At the Autism Society of America, of course, our main thing is options across the spectrum. And I'm going to say something here that's controversial, and Kim and Chris will probably not like this, but I think we either need to split apart as a community or stop fighting as a community. This divisiveness between different people in our ASD world gives the government excuses to do nothing. And until we solve that problem, we aren't going to make the kind of progress we need to make across the spectrum. I feel very strongly about that. As was spoken about earlier in some of the sessions, people who can talk have had the microphone and they're on the internet. They have very high needs too, but their needs are very, very different from this group's needs. And we need to be able to recognize that and either come together or agree to split apart.
Thank you. Yes, Kate.
I want to concur with Lori on what she said, and also to really actively look for the places where you can find common ground with people and with organizations, so that you can be fighting together. You don't have to, nobody agrees on everything. It's a rarity. We marry people, well, I don't, but we marry people who we don't agree with on everything. And so there's a lot of power to be had by working together as a team. I want to see the derogatory language related to choices that people make taken out of the system, because community is not some mythical place. Community is where you find it. And I think during this pandemic, a lot of us have had to create new communities because of the social isolation that we've experienced. And it's really important that every individual have a right to thrive in the community where they live, where they work, and where they want to be and with whom they want to be, without anybody else describing that in very negative ways.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of vitriolic, unfortunately, talk out there. Okay, quickly, we'll go to Angela and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, so I am not going to get into that more recent debate, but I do want to come back to what policy priorities we should target. And I think if you take a look back and you look at the sort of 60,000 foot level, what is Congress going to pass next? Congress is going to pass an appropriations bill, and appropriations include things like funding for research, funding for autism research, which is something that Autism Speaks, Autism Society, and other autism groups are supporting. It will also include funding for programs like special ed and other discretionary programs that are very important. So I think that's a top priority that groups should be focusing on right now, is federal appropriations. Beyond that, what other bills is Congress going to look at? And Kim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a number of bills on the agenda. However, I think first and foremost, Congress is still grappling with the response to coronavirus. And just like the Autism Society, Autism Speaks has been focusing on priorities that we can get in coronavirus response pieces of legislation. So we got all 4 of our priorities in the last American Rescue Plan. Prior to that, we were working together with the Autism Society and others in DC to try and advance our priorities and the other pieces of legislation. I think there's been 4, Kim, is that right? And Congress is already thinking about the 5th coronavirus response bill. So I think in terms of priorities, the most timely things for any group of autism advocates is 1, appropriations, and 2, the next bill that's likely to pass, which I think will be coronavirus 5.
Thank you. Super helpful. Amy, let's move forward to the next question, if that's okay.
Okay. So Medicaid services, federal dollars as may be matched by state funds, have provided the largest safety net in the country for adult autism services. But ICF closures, long HCBS wait lists in many states, and even if a waiver is obtained, difficulty finding services and DSPs for those with challenging behaviors is extremely difficult, as we heard in the questions to Melissa Harris. A lot of our, what the people here today are very concerned about that. What should be done to fix this problem? And do we need to think bigger than Medicaid?
Okay, this is talking about services for the very severe who have trouble finding anything in the community that will actually serve them. Anybody want to give it a spin? Scott, go ahead, your hands first.
Well, I guess I don't quite see how we can think about this without Medicaid, or at least what Medicaid represents, which is government funding of the services that are needed. When you look at what it costs to provide services with individuals with significant disabilities, the set of folks who can fund that without government help, you can count on one hand virtually. So there needs to be adequate government funding, whether you call it Medicaid or you call it something else. Right now, Medicaid is what we have. And I think the best solution is to adequately fund Medicaid, both at the federal and state level. Unfortunately, the states are the ones that get to decide how much in the way of Medicaid dollars they're going to spend, and the feds then kick in their share. I think it would make a lot of sense for the federal government to come up with a minimum set of standards that all the states must meet with appropriate funding, and then have the federal government, again, continue to kick in its share.
Great. Kim.
I totally agree, Scott. And an earlier speaker did talk about the Dingell bill, the HCBS Access Act, the Home and Community-Based Services Access Act. And it's a discussion draft. It's not a bill yet. And so the champions are taking everybody's feedback right now. So I do encourage everybody to provide feedback on that bill, but that's something that we've been working on for years. The policy objective in that bill is to make home and community-based services and supports mandatory service. Because the waivers to Medicaid rules started back in the 1980s. When families didn't want their children to go into an institution, so they waived the Medicaid rules and allowed families to keep their kids at home. That makes sense. But then, since then, most people don't want to live in an institution and they want a Medicaid waiver. The problem is that states get to have waiting lists, and a lot of the waiver services are optional, including ICF, which is intermediate care facilities. Those are, it was actually Melissa Harris mentioned that's an optional service. So you actually have to go to your state if you want to, lobby your governor to allow for ICFs. And then they would be mandatory to provide those services. And now some people have to get those services out of state, and that's not ideal for a family to have to send their adult child out of state for services. But the HCBS Access Act, again, would make those services mandatory. The states would then put all their services in a state plan, and they wouldn't have to apply for a waiver. Services would be portable across states, which is always a big problem. There would be, like Scott said, a floor of services that would include a lot of things that were talked about today, including supports in housing and respite care, and it's a very broad list. And I think that that's something that we all can come to an agreement on. I hope that we can all agree on supporting that bill when it comes out.
I think I do want to drill down into this question, though. which is, okay, we can dream about, full funding for HCBS, whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But I do think there is a specific problem where you have the most severe cases, and providers in the community can cherry pick their clients, right? Providers don't want the difficult clients, right? Most of these people can't get into group homes, for example, because of the level of need. What can these families do, right? Today, here and now, when, on paper, right, they have a waiver, but they can't access services because their kid is too difficult. Angela, sorry.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And what that highlights is the intense flexibility that states have in operating their Medicaid program. Technically, the level of care criteria for an ICF and an HCBS waiver is the same, because the HCBS waiver is waiving off of that ICF. What is happening when you have individuals with any type of specific need, whether it be a severe autism or other thing, if they don't have providers that can meet their needs, where advocates, in my opinion, should focus their attention is at the state agency that oversees those programs. And they need to be demanding that the programs be modified and funded in order to serve the population that's not being served adequately. And I think, the HCBS Access Act, I would agree with Kim. Everybody read it, send in your comments to the offices, because if we all participate and make this the best version of the bill, then that'll help everybody that it needs to help. And so they need to hear from a wide cross section of stakeholders, not just a single echo chamber. But I think what needs to happen in order for states to be able to develop the spectrum of services that are needed is they need a lot more funding. And right now, when state Medicaid budgets are being constrained because of enrollment growth due to economic downturns caused by the pandemic and increased costs because providers are just having a hard time weathering the storm, they are looking at where they can reduce spending. And the reductions always happen in the optional services, which are the long-term services and residential services for people with DD. And, your point about Medicaid is a large player. Medicaid is the only payer. If you look at funders of long-term services and supports in the United States, it's Medicaid. There's less than a third, 25% based on some estimates of the entire population, which includes a large aging population. It's private pay. Nobody else is paying for this. So you have to focus on Medicaid. You have to focus on your state agencies and have a constant continual dialogue about what the problems are and focus them on creating these solutions, because you're not going to get it from the federal government. The best you'll get from the feds is money. And that's, I think, what the HCBS Access Act and some of the funding in the ARP helps with, is it provides a source of revenue that state advocates can then advocate for the use of with their state policymakers.
Thank you. I'm going to make a quick editorial comment, and then Scott has his hand up. But yes, Medicaid is obviously, the big major player here. But people need to understand that Medicaid isn't paying for brick and mortar. Medicaid is paying for the services. And believe me, most adults with autism cannot earn a living, especially at the level that will provide for their own roof over their head. So a very important element to community living is HUD waivers or other, housing and urban development, but housing authority basically supports, right, and subsidies for people. And that's the reason I'm able to provide low income autism housing, is because of those supports. We can't lose track of how important it is to maintain, brick and mortar subsidies as well as the services. Scott, go ahead.
I think it's very important that we understand what the proposed HCBS access bill actually does. Yes, it makes HCBS a mandatory service. And yes, it would get rid of the waiting lists that currently exist. But what you need to look at is how it goes about doing that. And it does that on the backs of the ICFs. It actually would be the death knell of ICFs throughout the entire country. because what it does is it gets rid of the provision in the Social Security Act that right now says to a state, if you want to offer HCBS services, you must also offer ICF services. That provision in the Social Security Act would be repealed. And so there would be no requirement for a state to offer ICF services. And then it goes on to say that for HCBS services, the costs will be 100% funded by the federal government. So a state could choose to continue to offer ICF services, but it would only get reimbursed by the feds anywhere from 75 to 50%. So there'd be a huge incentive for states to get rid of their ICFs, and ICFs would no longer be required. And so if the HCBS access bill were enacted as it currently is drafted, ICFs would disappear. And there are thousands of folks, there are hundreds of thousands of folks across this country, including my daughter, that need ICF services. So I hate to say this, but this bill is a bad bill. And it can be changed. We can get rid of waiting lists. We can make HCBS mandatory services. We can make ICFs mandatory services. But let's do this the right way. Let's all work together to get the services that the wide spectrum of folks with disabilities need. We should not be fighting with each other. We should be working together to solve this problem.
Thank you. Before we move to the next question, any other comments on this? Okay.
I just quickly say that I agree with everything Scott just said. I like the aspirations of this bill. As Kim said, there are things about traveling across state lines. If you have a child in an ICF and your job in New York tells you you've got to move to Chicago, you have to make a choice of whether to move your child or not, because your child cannot get an ICF in Chicago, just like that. There's this rumor that there's no waiting list for ICF services. There's no waiting list for ICF services because basically you can't get them. There aren't enough beds. They aren't available. In Michigan, they have one ICF that has, I think, 4 beds in it that the state uses to qualify for running the waiver services. A lot of advocates speak about there being an institutional bias. And in a technical sense, there is, because of the way the law is written. But there's no such bias if you can't get your child into an ICF. I'd say in many ways there's a anti-institutional bias going on in the system these days. If you look at the last COVID relief bill, originally there were 7.5% FMAP increase when it left the House. It went to the Senate, they discussed it for a while, and they elevated it to a 10% FMAP increase. But that was only for HCBS
And explain, some people don't know what FMAP is. Can you just-
FMAP is the federal matching. I forget exactly what the language is. Scott probably remembers it better than I do, but it's
federal
matching.
portion.
Yeah, it's this increase, we've rallied very hard to try to get this across the board to all people with IDD and all caregivers, no matter what setting, because COVID doesn't discriminate against people. But the Senate saw it in its wisdom to move this to 10% and only for HCBS services. At the same time, they were lobbied to increase funding for public schools. And they had plenty of money that was going to go just to public schools. But at the last minute, they decided to give it to private schools, parochial schools, and charter schools as well, because the Senate in this wisdom saw that it was appropriate that all children and all schools were affected by this. And they gave the money to everyone across the board for schools. So again, it's another question of why what's good for all of society is not necessarily applied to the IDD, the autism communities. We make exception for these people when we should really be following the rules that we apply to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori and then Kim. And then we'll move on to our next question, which is about employment.
Oh,
Lori.
and I hope Kim and I don't contradict each other. I'm just going to say
It's
that
okay.
the last two gentlemen made a very excellent point. Does anybody out there have the statistics? I know Jill and I sat on a MI National Institute of Health, National Institute of Mental Health panel. And what percentage of people on the autism spectrum live in an ICF or a restricted setting like that? Very few, very few. And the conversation is constantly about deinstitutionalizing people, and yet there are no institutions for our folks. I sit on we do have state facilities in the state of North Carolina, and I sit on the admissions committee for the statewide units that are time limited. And these are the most difficult of the most difficult people. We have huge waiting lists, back to the point of the two gentlemen. You can say that there's an institutional bias, but you can't get a person into an institution. So I think that the national conversation is mixed up. Kim, I'll let you go on.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I feel like, personally, and I do have a family member with developmental disabilities and with intellectual and autism. I feel like the most important thing that brings quality in community living is the direct support professionals. And so the relief bill that just passed tries to focus attention, and you heard from Melissa Harris today that they're going to put out guidance to make sure that some of that extra money in the Medicaid home and community-based services funds goes to supporting and doing systems change to make sure that direct support staff get better pay, get a career path, and because we just don't have enough quality direct support professionals anywhere. And then the HCBS Access Act that we were just discussing will have a portion related to building the workforce. And I think it's really important, but it's not, that part isn't even drafted yet. Again, they're looking for, people like you that are in the States and on the ground and understand that those different systems, because the problem is, with Medicaid is that it is a federal state program. And so it looks different in every state. And there's so many options in Medicaid that state advocacy is really needed to make sure that your states are taking up the correct options. And that's why at the Autism Society of America, we're trying to build our state advocacy. That's something that's really important to us because we realize how important it is to do advocacy at the state level on all of these things.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to just say before we go on that I think this whole institutional bias thing is a myth. It's impossible. Like in the state of California, it's like impossible, right, to get your child admitted into an institution. I've seen data from our DDS, somewhere between 95 to 99% of people with autism in our state live in the community, right? With parent support, HCBS support, or ICFs, which is actually a form of HCBS. So yeah, it kind of baffles me that we aren't talking about the 99% and we're spending so much time talking about the 1%. But let's move on. Our next question is about employment, which has been a hot issue in the disability community. But employment has been nearly impossible to find for those with severe autism, with a handful of exceptions, with some 14C programs. 14C is the authorizing statute that enables sub-minimum wages. Now 14C is under attack and special wage jobs may be eliminated forever. What should we be doing to ensure that programs that offer purpose, skill building, engagement, and even maybe some income, not just visiting parks and malls, grow in number and thrive? Just throwing away 14C doesn't seem to be the answer. Who wants to take it? I'm going to start with Kate, whether you want it or not.
Well, I was actually going to put up my hand, Jill, because I think the most important thing is you cannot eliminate 14C with something without something to replace it that is an employment option, because there is dignity in work and people enjoy their jobs. Taking a job away from somebody who already has options for rehabilitation without any understanding, no data on what has actually happened to people in those states and localities where 14C has already been eliminated. And so this issue is fraught, and I just want to acknowledge that. And it's complex. It's why we do not feel it should be in the Raise the Wage Act, the elimination of it. This affects individual lives. And we all should be working together to expand options for people rather than taking options away that are working for people currently, when we have a 12.6% unemployment rate and only 19.9% of people over the age of 16 with disabilities are attached to the workforce in the first place. So I think there are a lot of people working under 14C. It's far fewer than there used to be. And to the extent that that's because they have found other options that are working for them, that's fantastic. But we don't want to take opportunities away from people and not leave them with an option that's satisfying for them.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to speak to employment? Lori and then Scott.
I just want to say that, again, reiterating what the previous person said, but also, again, it's the same sort of bias against congregation of people with disabilities. I know that I'm a founder of a employment company here in North Carolina, where everyone is paid at least minimum wage. We're not a medical facility, and we do not accept any state funding or federal funding directly. Obviously, a lot of the people have job coaches, and therein lies the problem. Because even though at the peak, now during COVID, it's come down a bit, we had 65 employees that made minimum wage or better, paid taxes, and we were 85% self-sustaining, 15% annual fund. Our state fights, the state of North Carolina fights us constantly because they say we have too many, it's not inclusive enough. Too many people and we say, how do you know? We can't ask them if they have a disability. It would be against the law. We run a regular business, but they come in and they look around, and obviously most of our people have a developmental disability. Therefore, Voc Rehab isn't going to support us. You can't, all of these things, there's no solution because they keep putting up roadblocks. No matter what you do to try to follow the rules, get people out of a sheltered workshop. This is not a sheltered workshop. People apply for a job, they have to work, they get paid, they get deductions, etc. They fight us because they say too many IDD people working together. Even though we charge the same price or more than anybody else offering this service, the state will not support us.
That's unbelievable. That's infuriating. You're doing exactly right. You're doing the model program. Okay. I think, was it Scott or Kim next? I forgot. Scott, go ahead.
So, I see the 14C issue as very, very similar to the residential issue that we just talked about. And I say that because it's another situation where we have folks who have a certain ideological point of view that are saying, we know what's best for everyone, and we're going to tell you what is the best way for you to spend your day. And we're going to tell you where the best place it is for you to live. We're not going to let you make the decision for yourself. We're going to tell you. And so we're going to take away 14C programs and say everybody should be competitively employed. Just like we're going to say everybody should live in a small home or apartment in a neighborhood. My point of view is, just like with the residential setting, we need to allow for all options to be available and let the individual and the individual's family decide what is best. Today, nobody is forced to work under a 14C certificate. Everybody that wants to have the opportunity for a job that pays minimum wage or better has that opportunity. But there are many folks that prefer to work in 14C programs, and that preference needs to be respected. That's the real civil right here, the right to make the choice of how you wish to live your life.
Thank you. Somebody else. Okay, Kim, go ahead.
Again, our systems are so outdated. VR doesn't serve people with developmental disabilities very well. I know it firsthand when I was trying to get a job for Bill, and the counselors there didn't know how to serve Bill. And they were supposed to have an individualized plan for employment. There was no individualized plan. They asked him questions about what kind of job he wants, and what does he like to do? Well, he likes to play ice hockey and likes to watch ice hockey. He likes to swim. But they just came back and gave him what was available, a cleaning job. Well, he was terrible at the cleaning job. That's not what he wanted. He wasn't good at it. And he got fired. We need to have things to be individualized, and we do know what to do now. Many of you might know I used to work representing the University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and all the research and best practices are now developed, showing that we can do a lot more customized employment and figure out what are the skills and desires and of each individual person. And our system is not doing that. And just like the direct support professionals in residential communities, we don't have people working to help people find jobs that know how to do customized employment, and also just they're not paid well enough, so we don't get good people that have an imagination and help and understand what employers need. So we have to invest a lot more in the employment arena and supported employment arena, in my point of view. I actually think that the HCBS Access Act will help in this area as well. One of the optional services in Medicaid is supported employment. There's also discretionary spending in supported employment. It's been funded at the exact same level since supported employment was ever funded. So I think we need to transform our systems and modernize them. Our university centers and on DD councils, for years they went into non-integrated settings and asked people where do they want to work, and 80% of them didn't want to work there. So for those 80% that don't want to work there, they should be supported in finding whatever work they want.
Well, yeah, nobody, I think, disputes that, but it's about those who really can't access competitive integrated employment.
And they should be represented. And individuals that don't want to work or can't find work in a competitive setting should be provided, supports to have meaningful day programs. And there's a lot of people that won't be able to work full time, and for the rest of their day, they should be able to find interesting things to do. For sure.
Hugo, and then Kate, and then Lori, and then we will move on.
It's very good that we're trying to support programs that provide people with integrated competitive employment. That's a good thing. There's no reason that we should take away anything else in doing so. It's like saying that in order to get more people to watch baseball, in the summer, we need to get rid of hockey in the winter. These programs serve a niche group of people who either by choice or by their skill set fall between competitive employment and day programs. They have talents, they have skills, they have abilities. They want to increase them. They want to work with others on that level. Same as me, same as everyone here. I don't want to be in a job where I'm like with people who are in completely different skill sets. I want to be in a place where it's compatible. As Kate McSweeny said, community is inside you. And these centers are community. No one forces anyone into it. You apply for a 14C. You try to get into these programs. Again, not everybody can get in. There are only so many programs, so many seats. They're not isolating environments. They're a choice, and we have to increase choices in order to make a better system.
Absolutely. All right. Next, I think was Kate.
Well, I just wanted to add that, and I have such respect for and the people on this call, all of them. There are so many ancillary issues that go along with this, increasing the asset limit. A lot of people can't work, even people who have competitive jobs can't work enough hours to be self-sufficient because they fear losing their benefits. You have transportation issues, and you have the risk that an employment outcome for voc rehab purposes might be for 6 or 10 hours a week, which leaves a lot of empty days. So I think flexibility is what's needed here to expand choices. If somebody's working under a certificate and wants to work in competitive employment, it's possible to do both. And that should be encouraged. And increase the opportunities to do both. Introduce them to other jobs without the risk of losing that opportunity that they're already enjoying that they possibly could not get back again. I just think that we all should be working together to smooth the road and open a lot more doors to people without closing any.
Yeah, I think what Hugo said about baseball and hockey is true. And I referenced this in some of my opening comments about these scorched earth tactics, that have been undertaken by disability rights proponents. I actually agree with them on, a lot of the improvements that they're seeking, but I don't understand the mentality that we have to throw out all the babies with the bathwater. That one, I'll never understand that. So we need to retain, these options quite clearly. Okay, I think there's one more and then we'll move on. Was it Lori? Did you want to say something? And then
I just wanted to say that the bottom line on all of this is how do we get the population, the voting population of the United States of America, and therefore our elected officials to even care about this social cohort or see it as something that needs to be addressed. Kim arranged for me to testify before a subcommittee of Congress on small businesses having to do with employment models, etc. The only congressperson on that committee from the state of North Carolina didn't even bother to attend. And she had asked me for a donation within the last month or so, which I had done. And she didn't even bother. Now, maybe she was ill or something, but they don't care. That's when you get right down to it, very few of them care and they see it as an intractable problem.
I've encountered that too. That's a big, big question. Why would people care about the severely disabled, the severely autistic? They are seen, I think, widely as a drain, right? But you saw Dr. Zahorodny's slides. I mean, listen, this is a real social phenomenon. This is a real thing that's happening. And obviously, services are needed. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next question. Amy, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. But I'm going to just take 1 second to I can't say strongly enough how much I agree with, I think it was Hugo and maybe Kate who were pushing back on this idea of community. And I think that underlines a lot of these debates. And I think the idea that the best thing we can do for our loved ones with intellectual disabilities is surround them with non-disabled people. And that is a community is so offensive. And I think that, this goes unsaid a lot in these debates, whether services are in the community, out of the community. And I think we have to keep coming back to this idea that community is very individual and it involves relationships and not a geographical location. So I think that's a very important part of this conversation. And I just was going to take advantage of the opportunity to articulate that. Before we go on to the next question, which is about crisis care, which is another huge area, a huge area of concern for our population. Families living with aggression, self-injury, and property damage reach the breaking point and need either temporary or permanent therapeutic programs for their loved ones. But these are very few and far between. And, you know, I definitely can attest to this because my son spent almost a year at Kennedy Krieger. But what can be done to improve access to crisis care?
Angela.
Yeah, so this is a really important question, and Autism Speaks just had a thought leadership conference on this exact question. And there's not a lot of existing systems right now. There's very few. There's Kennedy Krieger, there's the the New England Center for Children. There's a developing program at Seattle Children's, and a few others. And we brought together experts in the field to talk about how do we build a system. And the answer is that there needs to be reform both in insurance laws that cover private insurance as well as in Medicaid. And what needs to be created is a continuum of services that starts with supports in the home for families that have individuals with severe and challenging behaviors, because you need to provide early intervention for folks before they get to the point where they're so severe that the only suitable option is an outpatient place or an inpatient placement, which doesn't exist, right? But there was also recognition that that continuum needed to include the entire continuum. So include the intensive inpatient placements that were being led by professionals who knew this stuff. And so you have to have private insurance reform, but also you have to have Medicaid start establishing new options. So there are a few things in Medicaid that can be done at the state level. There are health home programs or health home state options that were added by the Affordable Care Act and then expanded under the ACCSES Act to include an enhanced pediatric health home. And this would be a health home that could be a coordinated care model that could be a continuum of care, but you would have to get a state to develop one specifically for autism or for people with autism, with severe autism or autism and challenging behaviors. They don't yet exist. No state has done that yet. And they would be able to get enhanced funding for it. So that's just one of the things we looked at in terms of identifying ways in which we could develop a system of crisis care, and a system really needs to exist. And it can't just stop at, you provide a few hours of support to families, but it's got to be, throughout the lifespan and across the spectrum in schools, in, adult service providers and so forth. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen.
Kate?
I don't.
No, you muted yourself. Unmute. There you
I
go.
apologize. I don't know if this is an opportunity or not because I don't know the details offhand, but there is money in the American Rescue Plan that would provide money for mobile crisis intervention units, which I think are really needed across the country, and for behavioral health. And it may be something that we actually want to take up to make sure we're not forgotten when they actually start determining how to spend that money.
That's good to know. Yes, Kim.
Somebody in the chat mentioned about law enforcement training, and we totally agree that there needs to be a lot more training of first responders and law enforcement. And we're working on a bill right now with Senator Casey. It's a set of two bills, and one of them would authorize significant funding for law enforcement training, and then the other bill, so it's a companion bill, would set up a system so that if there's an emergency, that's not a criminal or fire or something like that, that it would support the service systems to be able to call somebody for a mental health crisis or any other type of crisis like that. And I this Autism Society of America is supporting those bills.
Thank you. Hugo?
I think this is probably a very important issue for National Council on Severe Autism to address. I know when Amy's son needed crisis intervention, she was able to get him into one of the few facilities that really offers this level of care, and that's great. If you hadn't, he might have gone into what I consider an inappropriate crisis care center, which is a forensic facility or the jail system or a psychiatric ward or something like that. We fund those options. For some reason, Medicaid, our government, whatever, does not fund enough Kennedy Krieger facilities. And that's what we need. We need to speak out on what our needs are more and more as we approach this. There are plenty of people saying, we need more supported employment. We need this, we need that. The voices that I'm hearing today are the voices that need to speak more than just to one another. We need to speak to our members of Congress. We need to speak to our governors. We need to get these messages out there. I have to thank Jill very much for calling this a council of experts, but I've got to say, I'm seeing 189 participants in the chat right now. You are all experts because you know more about autism than anybody else in the world. You may know differently from other people, but nobody knows more than you do. Nobody can tell your governor better than you can what is going on in your life. And this is what I think this group is very capable of doing. And the crisis intervention is vastly important for your families. So thank you.
Yeah, I should mention we are going to have a webinar at the end of the year devoted exclusively to this topic, and hopefully we'll be able to give it much more time and depth. Before we move on, yeah, Angela.
Yeah, and when Hugo was talking, it just reminded me that Congress is now revisiting earmarks or community improvement projects, which have been gone for a long time. But essentially, these are federal budget allocations that are directed to local projects in the district of congressmen. Things like establishing a Kennedy Krieger in a congressional district could be considered a community improvement project. So if you are so inclined to lobby Congress to, your congressperson to establish a community improvement project that develops crisis services, I think now the time is ripe. So.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. We only have about 15 more minutes. I'm going to ask one question about housing, and then Amy is going to ask a question about abuse. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to take some other questions. So I referenced earlier the fact that Medicaid pays for services and not brick and mortar, not rent, right? Not property taxes, not anything like that. As a consequence of that, we have a system, at least in some states, that I call autism housing for rich people only, because it's only the families, right, that can afford the rent, afford to develop, afford to buy a house, afford to do whatever it is, right, to buy an LLC share, to secure their children a spot, that then entitles the client, the child, right, to the Medicaid support dollars. Do you see what I mean? The Medicaid is predicated on the existence of an independent living situation, but that independent living situation, in most cases, is only available to people of means, unless there is, federal and state subsidy, right, for the housing. The way that it's done now is usually, not always, through a HUD voucher, a portable voucher, or what's called a HUD project-based voucher. But those lists are closed. You basically can't get them in a lot of places. And so the possibility of somebody actually living in the community is foreclosed because, you know, they can't rent someplace or buy someplace on their own. What is the solution to this? No one. Okay, Scott.
You know, I don't have a solution to it, but I think others on this panel have said in response to some other questions that our Medicaid system is antiquated. You know, it was developed 60 years ago. And it's been, you know, there's been patchworks done to it over the years. So, I mean, I've long thought that we really need to just take a whole new look at Medicaid and redo it. And not redo it in a way that some people think, meaning let's just have home and community-based settings and nothing else. I mean, really redo it so that it covers what is really needed in today's world to support folks with disabilities. And I think, you know, this whole notion that Medicaid doesn't support bricks and mortar is just, it doesn't recognize the need for bricks and mortar for certain folks. And, you know, I would like to join hands with all the other groups, whether it's Autism Speaks, Autism Society, you know, the ARC. Let's all join together and try to revamp the Medicaid system and bring it up to today's world. But I'm only willing to do that if folks are willing to recognize choice and make ICFs part of that discussion, recognize that ICFs have a role to play, and recognize that we need farmsteads, campus settings, intentional communities, as well as small homes and apartments, and have all those encompassed, all those become mandatory services, no waiting lists, and let's fully support all those options. I think that's the way we need to go.
All right. Anybody else on housing vouchers? Lori.
Jill, I think you could speak to, Jill invited me to a dinner at a friend of hers in Maryland's house. And that couple is in the development business. And he really opened my eyes to a lot of the ways obviously he has an adult child with autism, so he's on our side. But he said that all the different ways that developers get out of providing, I remember the one, Jill, do you, where you're required to have this many for low income people, but you don't have to advertise those. And if they aren't taken up within X period, then they flop over into regular income people.
You're talking about set-asides, which is a different form of providing low-income housing. Set-asides, I have to say, typically are a terrible solution for our population because they're typically small apartments in a highly dense development. And these are not settings that usually work for our kids, who usually need more space and need a backyard and need their own entry and engage in a lot of noise and property destruction or whatever. So you're right. But that's a program that is quite popular in a lot of places, but really doesn't serve us. Sorry, I don't mean to get into the weeds. Okay, let's do the last question, Amy, and then we'll see if we can. You're mute.
Sorry, all my kids have come home and my husband, and it's a little noisy back here, so I turned off my sound. So safety and abuse prevention is a huge topic for our families. Many community settings are unlicensed and unsupervised. ICFs and licensed homes at least have some level of ongoing accountability. What are the best steps to prevent abuse and neglect across all settings?
Lori. Unmute. Unmute, girlfriend. There you go.
Raise the pay for the direct service providers. I mean, if you underpay people to deal with an extremely difficult population that is just open for abuse. That's the single most important thing, in my opinion. Kim, do you agree?
Totally agree. And training.
Jill, I think part of this is about reporting. ICFs do report straight to the state disability agency, DDS, whatever it is in your state. Group homes report directly to the provider, who determines whether to escalate the situation. A lot of times, because they're having problems with staffing, they don't want to report something. They'll find a way to dismiss somebody, but they, and this is, again, this is just anecdotal information that I've received over the years, but they pass this on. There, a couple of years ago, there was the Inspector General of HHS did a number of studies, starting in Connecticut at the bequest of Chris Murphy, the senator there, found that 99% of reporting of incidents of abuse and neglect in group homes went unreported. Since then, he did Massachusetts, Maine, Alaska, a couple of other states. They recently did New York. It's gotten a little better. But in January of 2018, I believe it was, the ACL and the Inspector General and the Office of Civil Rights of HHS all came out with a statement saying, oh my God, there's gambling at Rick's, and they haven't really done anything about it. Protection and advocacy agencies are supposed to be on top of this. From what I've seen, they really aren't. If you're not part of the solution, you're a protection advocacy agency. So this, a person I know has suggested a 911 bill here in New York. He's a very zealous advocate, and he often doesn't get heard. But from what I've read of the bill, it makes perfect sense. All abuse should be reported to the police, and it should be taken there. It's a criminal act. If I were to abuse, somebody in my household, a neighbor or something, the police would be called. But somehow within a group home, that's not the case, and that needs to change.
Sorry, someone just commented, what I discovered is that cases of abuse in skilled nursing facilities is made public, even minor infractions. This is not done in group homes for the developmentally disabled. We need to demand the same level of transparency as that which is applied for grandma and grandpa. Sorry, was that you, Lori? You just raised your hand?
I just there's always good and bad in every type of organization, but I know that I have a daughter who's an attorney with disability rights, North Carolina, and they do actually monitor situations. When she first started as an attorney, her specialty is IEPs. When she first started, she had to go into the prisons, and that was really something. But they monitor, they try their best. They're very limited on a budget basis, and they're very limited again on, you have to call them in most cases. Other than monitoring the state facilities, et cetera, you need to call them in to report a situation. And they work very hard.
Let me just say, I didn't mean to disparage people who are working hard and so on. I just get a lot of cases of different agencies that are focusing on lawsuits to close ICFs. They're focusing on taking people out of ICFs and moving into the communities a lot. I'm sure there's plenty of people working on abuse cases. And I think, though, that sometimes some of these cases seem like they'd be pretty obvious. When I read newspaper reports, you see people with years of bruising and broken bones and stuff. And why wasn't this caught before? Why aren't we getting this? And that's what concerns me.
One thing that concerns me is with this whole controversy over HCBS settings, there were many advocates who were equating safety, personal safety from negligence and abuse, equating that to the setting, that the setting is what creates the opportunity, right, or incentive for abuse. I thought this was completely nuts because what I've seen is that abuse happens across all settings. I've had friends whose adult children were abused in supported living, which is an unlicensed HCBS program, right? I've had friends whose kids were abused in regular school, in residential school. I've known people who were abused in day programs. I mean, I've known people who were abused not, in the community, right? Not unattached to anything. I know people who are subject to police violence. I mean, it just seems to me that settings cannot be the proxy, right, for how we go ahead and improve safety for our loved ones. And we have to move past that into something that's more real and pragmatic, which has to be around, number one, supervision, number two, training, right? And some systematic way of reporting these things. Anybody else? And then we have 5 more minutes and we can take a couple of other questions from Q&A. And then everyone can go eat lunch. Nope. Okay. All right. So we have 5 more minutes. I think what I'll do is just take a question, and then if anybody has any closing comments, let's do that. Amy, do we know how people can get the list of the 15 plus neurobehavioral units in the US?
I put the list in the states that have them in the chat. That comes from Matt Siegel, who's on our board, and he's a psychiatrist who runs one of those units in Maine. So I don't know the names of the hospitals, but the states that they're in are in the chat.
Okay, thank you. I haven't been monitoring chat, so thank you. Okay, well, let's just go to closing comments now. We only have 4 minutes. I'm going to open the floor for you guys to say anything you want on any topic relating to severe autism.
Let me start by saying I think I agree with what Allison and Jill, Amy, and others in your community have said about keeping a definition of profound or severe autism. I know that in the IDD community over the last 40 years, things have moved to getting rid of the term mental retardation to a less specific term of intellectual disability. That has led to almost a homogenizing of the population. Any homogenization ends up discriminate or marginalizing the people at either end. I find that currently our services are aimed at helping those who are what I call aspirational, the people who are trying to integrate with non-disabled people, the people who are trying to do work and so on. The newspapers report on this. The TV shows feature these people. I'm all for this part of our society getting more recognition and so on. But when it happens at the expense of the people who have higher needs, who are perhaps more expensive to support, to give the supports they need, and who basically aren't the happy stories. Somebody living to be 65 years old with an extreme disability that's very expensive to support does not make the news, whereas somebody who becomes, the autism doctor does. So yes, please continue to stand up, make that difference. Don't let them say, get rid of silos, make yourselves known. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim.
Well, just following along with Hugo, as I mentioned before, that I've been in the developmental disability policy field for over 20 years, and I started out working for the developmental disabilities councils, and so and work for the USEDS. And so I'm very familiar with the Developmental Disabilities Act and its history. And I remember, learning about Elizabeth Boggs and how she, developed the term developmental disability to mean chronic, severe disability that impacts, 3 or more major life activities, and that's basically how it's defined in the DD Act, which includes autism. And then by doing that, it got all the developmental disabilities organizations to be able to get together and advocate together for laws that for those most severely impacted by their disabilities. And I kind of really appreciated her effort. And actually, that's how CCD, the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, got started, was these DD groups getting together to advocate for the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act, or the DD Act. And I hope that we can continue to do that, because I think that we do have significant needs that we need to keep focus on people with the most significant needs, to be advocating for them. And that's what I focus on. And I like to be in coalition and not be separate, siloed, just autism, but all developmental disabilities, because they do have that same common denominator of being chronic, severe, and lifelong, and needing lifelong supports.
Thank you. Okay, one more minute, Lori.
Okay, I want to say that I need to jump off here, because while Jill's going to go have lunch, I have to go to the Autism Society of America Finance Committee and figure out how we're going to pay for all these wonderful things for our affiliates.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, but I do want to say that we have concentrated today on a specific sub-cohort of the autism spectrum cohort. And my own personal experience leads me to be very much involved with this sub-cohort. But I do want just to remind everybody that the Autism Society of America, we really are about options all across the spectrum. And the other thing is, I don't want to ever give the sense that all self-advocates are out there saying these things that we don't like. I have learned so much from many self-advocates who can tell me, unlike my son, how they feel and why they feel that way. And they are not trying to get rid of ICFs or anything like that. So again, all members of this community are valued and need to be taken into account.
Yeah, no doubt about that. We would not disagree with that at all. All right, we're a little over time, but if someone else wants 30 seconds or a minute, raise your hand. Angela.
Yeah, I just want to, sorry, my son's home. But I just want to reiterate that as autism advocates, the most important thing you all can be doing is telling your stories to your members of Congress, build those relationships. And I think, no matter what policy you're trying to advance, if you don't have those relationships with your members of Congress, that you won't be able to achieve any goals. So I think you've got a lot of potential for building great relationships and having champions in autism champions in Congress for severe autism going forward.
Thank you. I think on that note, a very important note, I think we will close our first Policy Summit. Thank you so much to our roundtable panelists and to our keynote speakers and to our board for putting this together. I learned a lot today. I hope everyone else did too. And hopefully we will follow up with more constructive dialogue. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. And we will post this. We will post the recording. Don't worry. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.